IMHO Talk Show. Sir Charles, Miss Max Razor.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis, only on 101.3 Jams.
IMHO Talk Show. Sir Charles, Miss Max Razor.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis, only on 101.3 Jams.
IMHO Talk Show. Sir Charles, Miss Max Razor.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis, only on 101.3 Jams.
We live in a society in which structural racism is a very real thing. We are all dealing with that in every aspect of our lives, and the media is a reflection of our community.
Historically, black people have been portrayed a certain way in the media to justify normative assumptions around political and social issues.
More black people behind the cameras, in front of the cameras, more producers, more people of color producing, so they can go and get the content that's needed so they can highlight our attributes.
I've been in this industry for 15 years, and I've seen firsthand how our voices just aren't heard. Even if you're in the newsroom, sometimes you get completely ignored and stereotypes are allowed to perpetuate. And one thing we want to do is combat that and also bring information to people so they can be as informed as possible when choices are made in this city, so they can do whatever they can to get their voices heard.
What I believe can be done about the situation is to have more people of color creating news stories, more people who have a interest in and a social consciousness that relates to the stories that they're telling.
Charlottesville Tomorrow looks at these issues. We can present them on IMHO. Vinegar Hill Magazine can take that a step further, and just together we can just make this thing that can be an example of how we can change the media landscape, how we can be more inclusive to get these voices in, to get these people heard. That's just one thing that doesn't happen in so many places, and it's a shame.
We think we live in a society that's very progressive, and we're talking about equity and diversity and inclusion and all of these things. Still, the way that black people, and I would say, and I would argue, especially black men, are portrayed by the media is incredibly dangerous, and you've seen the sort of tangible violence that it's led to over the past year.
The community can support the SIM project by first and foremost giving us an opportunity. We understand that it can be difficult to give trust right now, especially considering the current social and political environment. But this project will only be as successful as the community allows it to be. And so we ask you to give us the opportunity to do the work, critique the work, and make sure that we stay aligned with the vision. Another way that the community can get behind the SIM project is through engagement. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you're talking about. We want to put your stories out there. And so whether it's reading the articles written by Charlottesville Tomorrow or Vinegar Hill Magazine, or tuning in to In My Humble Opinion on Sundays on 101.3 Jams from noon to 3 p.m., either way, we want you engaged. We want you to be part of this. The community can also support the SIM project through funding. To learn more about how to support SIM, you can visit our website. Thank you for your support.
We live in a society in which structural racism is a very real thing. We are all dealing with that in every aspect of our lives, and the media is a reflection of our community.
Historically, black people have been portrayed a certain way in the media to justify normative assumptions around political and social issues.
More black people behind the cameras, in front of the cameras, more producers, more people of color producing, so they can go and get the content that's needed so they can highlight our attributes.
I've been in this industry for 15 years, and I've seen firsthand how our voices just aren't heard. Even if you're in the newsroom, sometimes you get completely ignored and stereotypes are allowed to perpetuate. And one thing we want to do is combat that and also bring information to people so they can be as informed as possible when choices are made in this city, so they can do whatever they can to get their voices heard.
What I believe can be done about the situation is to have more people of color creating news stories, more people who have a interest in and a social consciousness that relates to the stories that they're telling.
Charlottesville Tomorrow looks at these issues. We can present them on IMHO. Vinegar Hill Magazine can take that a step further, and just together we can just make this thing that can be an example of how we can change the media landscape, how we can be more inclusive to get these voices in, to get these people heard. That's just one thing that doesn't happen in so many places, and it's a shame.
We think we live in a society that's very progressive, and we're talking about equity and diversity and inclusion and all these things. Still, the way that black people, and I would say, and I would argue especially black men, are portrayed by the media is incredibly dangerous, and you've seen the sort of tangible violence that it's led to over the past year.
The community can support the SIM project by first and foremost giving us an opportunity. We understand that it can be difficult to give trust right now, especially considering the current social and political environment. But this project will only be as successful as the community allows it to be. And so we ask you to give us the opportunity to do the work, critique the work, and make sure that we stay in line with the vision. Another way that the community can get behind the SIM project is through engagement. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you're talking about. We want to put your stories out there. And so whether it's reading the articles written by Charlottesville Tomorrow or Vinegar Hill Magazine, or tuning in to In My Humble Opinion on Sundays on 101.3 Jams from noon to 3 p.m., either way, we want you engaged. We want you to be part of this. The community can also support the SIM project through funding. To learn more about how to support SIM, you can visit our website. Thank you for your support.
We live in a society in which structural racism is a very real thing. We are all dealing with that in every aspect of our lives, and the media is a reflection of our community.
Historically, black people have been portrayed a certain way in the media to justify normative assumptions around political and social issues.
More black people behind the cameras, in front of the cameras, more producers, more people of color producing, so they can go and get the content that's needed so they can highlight our attributes.
I've been in this industry for 15 years, and I've seen firsthand how our voices just aren't heard. Even if you're in the newsroom, sometimes you get completely ignored and stereotypes are allowed to perpetuate. And one thing we want to do is combat that and also bring information to people so they can be as informed as possible when choices are made in the city, so they can do whatever they can to get their voices heard.
What I believe can be done about the situation is to have more people of color creating news stories, more people who have a interest in and a social consciousness that relates to the stories that they're telling.
Charlottesville Tomorrow looks at these issues. We can present them on IMHO. Vinegar Hill Magazine can take that a step further, and just together we can just make this thing that can be an example of how we can change the media landscape, how we can be more inclusive to get these voices in, to get these people heard. That's just one thing that doesn't happen in so many places, and it's a shame.
We think we live in a society that's very progressive, and we're talking about equity and diversity and inclusion and all these things. Still, the way that black people, and I would say, and I would argue, especially black men, are portrayed by the media is incredibly dangerous, and you've seen the sort of tangible violence that it's led to over the past year.
The community can support the SIM project by first and foremost giving us an opportunity. We understand that it can be difficult to give trust right now, especially considering the current social and political environment. But this project will only be as successful as the community allows it to be. And so we ask you to give us the opportunity to do the work, critique the work, and make sure that we stay in line with the vision. Another way that the community can get behind the SIM project is through engagement. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you're talking about. We want to put your stories out there. And so whether it's reading the articles written by Charlottesville Tomorrow or Vinegar Hill Magazine, or tuning in to In My Humble Opinion on Sundays on 101.3 Jams from noon to 3 p.m., either way, we want you engaged. We want you to be part of this. The community can also support the SIM project through funding. To learn more about how to support SIM, you can visit our website. Thank you for your support.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Sir Charles in the booth. Let me figure out which mic Miss Max on. Are you on? Let me see. We got you. Go say something to me.
Sound check, mic check.
Yeah, you're a little low. Go ahead and switch back to that other mic. Yeah. You could be anywhere in the world, but you are here with us, and we appreciate that. So thank you kindly. Thank you kindly. Because we are back for yet another show where we got some good info to give to the people. But first things first, Miss Max, how are you feeling today before we get this thing started?
Look, it's IMHO. It's live. Ready to go.
Live and in full effect. Yes, indeed. So, and that's a good right there, that configuration we got right there too, because we got some guests is going to be joining us in person, and we got some guests that are online as well. Okay. And we're going to kick it off. As we said in the intro, delighted to have this young lady with us. I think, first time meeting us, first time having her on air, but, newbie. But hopefully we don't offend her, and hopefully the listeners will like it, and she'll want to come back and talk to us again, right?
That's never a good introduction. Hopefully we don't offend you, but thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here, Ruby. And Ruby, your microphone is muted, by the way. All right, cool.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. There we go. We got you. Good stuff. Yeah. And so Ruby is part of Legal Aid Justice Center. And as we said, there's a lot going on right now, a lot of still uncertainties and questions in the community. People just want to make sure they have all the perspectives when it comes to folks' experiences, the law, the rationale behind things such as the flock cameras, as well as the jail improvement / expansion. And Ruby, you notice how I preface that, right? Because you got folks on both sides of that coin, right? Some folks are saying it's not an expansion. Y'all stop saying that. They saying it's jail improvements for Charlottesville Albemarle Regional Jail because the structure is so old, what have you. But as we know, in general, if you're making improvements to things, you're kind of making it better, and in some cases more spacious. A synonym for spacious is what, Max? Expanded.
Right. Yeah.
In any other context, if we added 17,000 square feet to something, we'd call it an expansion, but that's just me. Yeah.
But Ruby, but first things first, where are my manners? good afternoon to you. And I want you to formally introduce yourself so folks know, exactly what roles you played, not only at Legal Aid Justice, but just sort of professionally in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again so much for having me on. My name is Ruby Cherian. I am an attorney with the Legal Aid Justice Center, and I work specifically in our civil rights and racial justice program. And you may see me around Charlottesville. I work quite a bit with our senior organizer, Harold Bully, in the community, with People's Coalition as well. So you may have seen me at a city council meeting or two at some meetings in Charlottesville.
Awesome, cool. Now, are you familiar to the area? Are you local to the area, or did you come here for this line of work?
Predominantly in our Richmond office, but I do. I'm pretty much in Charlottesville at least once a week working with Harold, like I said, and I went to school in Charlottesville as well.
Gotcha. Okay, good stuff. So I would love, before the conversation is done, to kind of just go over with you, things that the community should know about, that you're working on, in addition to the cameras in the jails as well. But let's start there, Max. And if you don't know, Ruby, Max and I have already talked to a lot of different folks, right? In regards to flock cameras and the jail expansion. We've talked to some activists. We've talked to formal council folk. We've talked to current council folk. We've talked to different elected officials, including the police department, right? And needless to say, you get different perspectives. So we're glad to have you, right, to give the raw legal, perspective, sort of, somebody that doesn't necessarily have, skin in the game either way, to kind of tell us about what has been experienced, right? Like what is sort of the legal ramifications, and then any public perceptions that you all have also ran into as well, by maybe some civilians that have talked to you about it. So how about we start with the flock cameras? How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Sounds great. Okay. All right. So what can you tell us about, I guess, one, the legal validity of it, right? And then the success rate, versus the profiling complaints, right? So let's start there with the cameras.
Yeah, that sounds good. Stop me at any time if you want to. I'm happy to talk a little bit about what ALPRs are, the flock cameras, if anyone is not familiar with them. Talk a little bit about the legal landscape here in Virginia, what you can and can't do with them, and talk about some of the litigation that is still up in the air about it, and some of the misuse and errors we've seen with this technology that causes us to have some concerns about protecting folks' privacy and making sure we're not having civil rights violations. But if you're not familiar with what an automatic license plate reader is, or an ALPR, it takes highly detailed photos of your license plate number when you drive by them. They're typically on street lights. They also track your make, model, and unique features of your vehicle. So what's a unique feature? So that includes things like any decals or bumper stickers you may have, roof racks, if you have a sticker in the window, aftermarket wheels, if you have a toolbox, if you have any exterior damage to the car, that includes something like rust. And what it does is it catalogs all of those details that makes your car unique. This is called vehicle fingerprinting through Flock. And it converts that into text that's then searchable by law enforcement. So they could search, Honda with rust, right? And search without even knowing the license plate number. So, ALPR is actually a little bit of a misnomer, I would say. And we have some colleagues who work in the policing project who argue that this is really more of a vehicle surveillance system. We're talking about much more than a license plate.
So it does sound like it's snapping a 360 picture of your car, which I'm curious as to how it's able to do that without taking a picture of the driver as well, or occupants.
Yeah, that is a concern that we have as well. Or if you're just happen to stand, by the street light, the company maintains Flock as the security company. If anyone's we keep calling it Flock. Flock is a security company providing this technology. They are maintaining that, the people are not searchable, but that is a concern that we share absolutely. And if you think about things like a bumper sticker, right? They share things like political affiliation, right? Any organizations they may be a part of. So all these unique details about your car are being cataloged into text that is searchable that we have some concerns about. They also, in addition to reading your license plate, also Flock has some software and AI powered tools that it uses as well. So one is convoy analysis. So they can use license plate information to see what cars often travel together. They also have a program called anomaly detection. And so if a car has outlier behavior, right? So it's doing something that's not normal for that car or doing something out of habit, it kind of flags that car as a possible threat or emergency situation, right? So this is not just what you can observe on a license plate. It's using data and algorithms and combining them with AI to do, go beyond and aggregate this data in a way to find patterns. And of course, if you're getting a picture of every car license plate, that's the back of every car that's driving by, that's a lot of data to filter through. So Flock also has what's called this NOVA system, which gathers all this data from multiple platforms and allows it to be more easily searched. So you don't have to search through different platforms, again, because they're just receiving so much data that it's hard to filter through. So that's a little bit about the technology itself.
So if I could ask, can you tell us, or do you know what components, I guess, of that program that specifically the Charlottesville Police Department have or operating?
Yeah, so that, I don't know that I could say the exact specifics. There is what's called a transparency portal online that you can Google. And so that sort of information is not available on there, but I think we can say pretty probably confidently that convoy analysis and anomaly detection are just part of the software. I think the question would be if they have NOVA as well. But Flock is a company that really prides itself on layering these technologies. That's how they talk about it, to gather the most amount of data possible. So I'm sure, it's not just the license plate reader we're talking about, it's the software as well. And that's really what you're paying for as well.
Yeah. And we had that conversation before too about Flock. So thank you for that clarification again, because Flock is like Kleenex, right? People call tissue Kleenex, but it's just the name brand, right? So thank you for that clarification again.
No worries.
Yeah.
And they're the largest one currently in the nation, and particularly in Virginia operating this tech, right? So they have a large centralized database. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about what ALPR law looks like in Virginia, if that's of interest.
Yeah. Well, but before we get to that though, I'm curious about, and you may touch on this in your next comments, but I'm curious about like the efficacy thus far, right? Like versus the complaints, right? Like versus the profiling and things of that sort. Like has one way outweighed the other? Has it been justified based on efficacy?
I think it's hard to tell because so far the efficacy has been reported by the local law enforcement jurisdictions themselves and not, for instance, like a third party who's really doing the research on that. But of course, we have heard about misuse and errors that has come out in a lot of news reporting. So for instance, it has been being used by federal agencies have been using ALPR data for immigration enforcement, even though that's technically against Flock's policy and against the policy of many police jurisdictions, but they are still using that data for law enforcement. States where abortion is restricted have also used ALPR data to try to prosecute accessing abortion in states where it's legal. So for instance, in Texas, they did a nationwide search of more than 83,000 license plate readers while looking for a woman who had a self-administered abortion. And they accessed cameras in states like Washington and Illinois where abortion is legal. And we also have, of course, more instances of misuse and law enforcement officers not confirming the plate reads, right? Technology is not perfect. And so there are instances, for instance, in Aurora, Colorado, a Black mother and her 4 girls were held at gunpoint and forced to lie face down on the pavement with their hands behind their backs. And of course, as you can imagine, this is a really traumatic event. And it turns out her plate had triggered a hot list of stolen cars, but she was driving a blue SUV and the stolen plate was for a motorcycle. And they didn't even confirm that it was the correct vehicle. So just needlessly causing folks to have traumatic interactions with law enforcement. Similar situation. This is not, isolated. There are situations like this in Ohio as well, where a canine was released on Brandon Upchurch after a flock ALPR misread his plate as stolen. In New Mexico, two sisters, 21 and 12, were held at gunpoint and handcuffed by law enforcement after a flock ALPR misread a 2 as a 7. And there's also been law enforcement officers who have been found using license plate readers to stalk former partners. This happened in Pittsburgh, where he used an ALPR to track his ex-partner's movements. And he had over 100 pages of entries as far as her location, times, and not just of hers, but of her family members as well. And there was also an officer in Connecticut who used license plate technology to search whether he was being considered as a suspect for burglary. So we can see that there is this lack of oversight causing a lot of misuse and errors. And again, just, what's at stake here is a really traumatic interaction with law enforcement as well, even with these misreads, as you can tell, to be pulled over at gunpoint because a 2 was read as a 7 is really traumatic.
Right. I'm going to drill down a little bit and ask you whether or not you've received or heard of any reports of misuse locally here in Charlottesville. And then what's the likelihood of any legal ramifications if an officer does misuse the software? For the individuals who are profiled or subject to their misuse, do they have any legal ramifications as a result?
Yeah, so I will say with regards to Charlottesville, it's hard to know, right? There is no audit. So I can't say definitively, yes, there has been, or definitively, no, there hasn't been. Again, right, there are so many hits, there's so much data that it's really hard to audit this. And without any oversight, we wouldn't even know if it is being used improperly. And so really, we need a warrant for this. And then the other thing I will say in terms of...
So the Legal Aid Justice Center has not received any reports, though?
No, we have not.
Okay.
And I'm just going to introduce my colleague here. This is Maisie Osteen. She's a senior supervising attorney here at the Legal Aid Justice Center as well.
Macy, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. It's really nice to be here. Thanks for having us. And sorry for my delay.
Oh, no, you're good. So, I guess this will be a good spot to just kind of, drop you in the conversation as well. So of course, Ruby has given us a great intro and a great sort of, synopsis of how, the LPR cameras are, I'm trying to stop saying flock, how the LPR cameras are being utilized and some of the stats around that and whatnot. So if there's anything that you want to add to that, but I'm also curious as well, and this may be something that you can tackle, Macy, is it mostly about oversight, right? Like, to get down to the nitty gritty, is the camera itself can be used for good or can be used for bad, right? So I'm curious about, as Max asked about, like the legal ramifications, right? Like, doesn't it more so fall on, and I'm asking the legal and professional question, like, doesn't it fall more so on the police department, or are there any infractions on privacy just by utilizing the cameras itself?
Yeah, and thank you so much again for having us. And to go back a little bit to the last question, I think that one of the things that was asked was, what are the legal ramifications if it has been used inappropriately? And number one, you have to know that it's been used inappropriately, right? And so that oversight is really tricky, as Ruby was indicating with Charlottesville. But there have been settlements across the country where there have been improper hits. I know that you all were talking about some of the misuse. Those have resulted in settlements. So there are legal claims when these law enforcement offices are doing things that are against their policy, and then that's resulting in harm to the community. We have not been a part of those personally, but they are out there, and there are examples. And to your second question, yeah, I absolutely. The license plate readers and the use of surveillance technology can be a use for good. There are definitely instances where missing people are found, or there's instances where people have positive interactions with this technology. The problem is that it's this unfettered, completely Big Brother-esque technology that's kind of everywhere. And without the oversight, there's little ways to kind of rein it in. And one of the big things that we talk about is hoping to see a warrant requirement, just a small, really a fairly, innocuous part of the legal process is for officers to be able to ask a court and say, I need this technology or I need this information for a purpose. And you have supposedly a third party that is unattached and can say whether that use is appropriate. And so just asking the court, hey, court, I think that this information would be helpful for us to be able to use in an investigation. It's pretty low. We all know that warrants get issued all the time. And so that's, I think it would be a huge help in making sure that this wasn't applied and used inappropriately.
Great point. And so how effective though would it be then if it's, it's a random instance and pretty much instantaneous? There's no, planned need for it until there is one. You know what I'm saying? Like how does requesting a warrant, how would that work if the need to activate Flock could be so instantaneous and spur of the moment?
And if a police department is sort of impeding that, like that ability to have oversight, then to me, that's a red flag itself, right? Like, why would you not want oversight to make sure it's being used properly? But yeah.
Absolutely. So to talk about the instantaneous, and Ruby, please jump in. But I think, so that data right now is held in certain jurisdictions. It can be held more than 30 days. Now in Virginia, it's held for 21 days. So a lot of the data is not being used necessarily instantaneously already, right? People are putting in information and then looking back to track what somebody's movements were. So in those cases where investigation purposes are being used, it would be very routine for an officer to use a warrant to access that kind of similar information. In instances where there is an instantaneous need, there's an exception to the warrant requirement already that says they have an immediate need for that warrant. And so there's an exception that's kind of built into our due process system for those situations. We don't have at least I don't think, maybe Ruby, I don't think we have the exact like data of when they're used immediately as opposed to when somebody's looking at retroactive information. But it seems in a lot of these instances that are coming up, somebody's putting in an officer or a law enforcement agency is putting in a license plate that they either want to track, as in a stolen car. So they're putting in a number, and then there's these hits, these hot list hits. And so that would kind of fall under that exigent circumstance, probably exception. Whereas those investigations where somebody says, okay, we want to know where Ruby drove her car through the city. Those things obviously would be easy to trigger a warrant and would be part of a normal investigation in most instances.
So we have thank you for that. We have a question from a listener viewer as well. What certifications does an officer have to be able to access this kind of information? And I guess
unfortunately, not much, right?
So can anybody on the police department access it, or is it just the chief? Or?
You have to have training. It's not just the chief, and also it's also not just law enforcement officers, but folks who work there as well. For instance, like analysts. You have what's in our understanding is about a 1-day training, and then you're able to access it on your phone, on the computer, and use Flock that way. It's not anything you have to be certified for. It's a low bar to entry.
So. I'll ask you, I don't know what both of your opinions are of like civilian-led police oversight boards. We happen to have one here in Charlottesville. And would a third party such as that be sufficient oversight for the use of this type of program, in your opinion?
In my humble opinion, maybe not. I obviously, I think that the civilian oversight boards were making great strides, and I think the idea is really a good idea at its root. Handing back the power of authoritarian checks to the people. Like, I think that that's a great idea. But as we know, and as we've seen in Charlottesville, there's a lot of struggles along with that process. And so I don't think that right now is the solution, although it could be in the future. The new law that went into effect in July requires an audit trail. And so I could see that like those audit trails maybe being released to civilian oversights. Right now in the new law, it doesn't allow those to be accessed through FOIA, which is generally how the Federal Information Act, that's how we usually would access it as just regular citizens. And so that will be cut off. And it's hard to see how that audit will really be tested. And I could see a civilian oversight board being very important in that piece. But the front end harm of the surveillance wouldn't be actually touched by that oversight, right? Like that's once the harm's happened, we could talk about it as a community, but not so helpful on the front end.
You know, I did not know that. So that information, the information that FLOC or the other acronym that you mentioned gathers is exempt from the Freedom of Information Act.
And that's the audit trail, and that's new with the new law. And I think that the intention behind that was they didn't want everyday citizens like each other to be able to watch our neighbors. And so I think at the heart of that is actually a good concept, but it's also really troubling when we now can't kind of test the accuracy of the information, accuracy of when the justifications or reasons are legitimate. Like we as people don't have that access right now.
Let me ask you a question. You guys can tell me whether or not there's any validity to this. I read that random citizens can purchase home cameras that can then be tapped into through the FLOC system.
So first of all, there are actually FLOC cameras like ALPRs that homeowners associations can get, businesses can get. So this is not something limited to law enforcement. And then they can opt to share that information with law enforcement, right? To create a centralized database. So even cameras that aren't, owned by the city or the law enforcement agency, they can still have access to private cameras.
Now, it's not so much the other way. Only law enforcement can access that network, or we don't know how wide the law enforcement definition is, but only law enforcement can tap in, whereas any citizen that has a camera associated with the network can share information. And a lot of the times that's how a lot of the information at the beginning was getting shared, because particularly FLOC's, I think a lot of their initial cameras were in homeowners associations and private property.
Got you. Now we do have, to that, in that vein, we do have another comment or question. If it's okay to track with somebody is going through the FLOC program, then is it okay to walk up and put a tracking device on somebody's car if you want to know where they want to go? And I think that kind of alludes to what Max was saying as well. But I mean, on somebody's actual property, wouldn't that require a warrant, or like, what's your response to that question, comment?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and actually something that the courts are dealing with right now. There's, been lots of challenges to FLOC in Virginia, and maybe I shouldn't say lots. Right now, there's a handful. I think we will continue to see more as the technology develops. And I think the courts right now, for the most part, have suggested it is okay. But I'm not sure the courts have the full understanding of the power of this technology and how quickly it's advancing. And that whole idea of the true, what is being said, the whole idea of that true surveillance, following people everywhere, understanding where they're going in their communities, is very different than just a number being entered into a database and having a single hit bing that says, okay, this license plate was here. That's not what we're seeing anymore. I know Ruby talked about this is so much information. And now when you integrate all of these hits, you're really being able to follow people. And I think that the comment talking about the beeper, there have been cases that have said that is okay, but there's some nuance to that case that says law enforcement could track somebody with a beeper, but part of that was that there was already an investigation going on, and that they put it on a piece of property that then the car owner put in their car. So there's already some distinctions that we can make. And the fight's happening right now in the courts to say whether that's okay and will it remain okay.
Yeah.
On that note, before if I can interject really quickly, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. But on that note as well, we're seeing this case, the civil rights case being filed in Norfolk with the Institute for Justice, and we are excited. We're looking to see what happens with that case there. We should see further movement in that case soon. So the decision, there's still the exact question of that is still up in the air to be decided as well, and also just. speaking, I've lost my thought. It will come back to me. I'm sure. I thought of it with the beeper. But it will come back to me at some point, I'm sure.
You keep thinking, because I wanted to add about the case that you shared. So keep thinking about that. That case, that Norfolk case, we should all be really interested in. It's really cool because it is a prospective. It is nobody's been. A lot of the challenges that we've seen have been where there have been criminal charges brought, and that the defendant brings a motion to suppress on the idea that evidence was captured wrongly. But this Norfolk case is interesting. A lot of these cases are out of Norfolk because they have 172 cameras. So a lot, they are under surveillance.
To that point, is it in areas with a higher demographic of people of color? Is that one? Are you noticing that since you mentioned Norfolk?
That is a great question. And I think there is a lot of connection there. And I think that a lot of, they often say high crime neighborhoods, which is oftentimes in their language synonymous with low income housing and supportive housing, which is a horrible connection. And that the Norfolk case is really interesting. This civil case is really interesting because both of these people are just regular Norfolk citizens who've not had an run-in with law enforcement. And so they're asserting their right, saying, I don't want to be watched. So it'll be cool for all of us to see how that case comes out and how the courts handle that.
Yeah, I've also been curious real quick about like GPS technology. Like most cars, more recent cars have some sort of GPS technology. Are law officers able to use that in a similar fashion? Like, can they like tap into that or request that information from the automobile manufacturer?
You know, they definitely use it in civil cases often. And they often use it in civil cases. I was a public defender in South Carolina, so a different system, but I did not often see that coming up. But I don't know if now we're in a new territory. In civil cases, I know it comes up often. We see the tracks of like what somebody was listening to. If we can see their speed changes. You can see all of that from those systems. And actually something that in casual communication, like I personally was shocked by, is when you purchase a car with those really advanced computer systems, you actually sign an agreement that agrees to all the sharing, which
interesting.
I'm like really thankful for my 2013, like not so smart car right now.
There's no such thing as privacy anymore. People may as well forget that. There's no.
Well, it's like we have to grip on to holding on to it, right? Like where we can, we really have to assert our privacy when we can.
Yeah. You know, I do think that that's one of the arguments being made locally is that this is not a mass surveillance type of software. At least that's not the way it's being operated here, because it's taking pictures versus just constantly recording. But as you mentioned earlier, if you get enough hits, then effectively it is mass surveillance because it's tracking the individual's moves. That and a little bit of math will help you to put all that together.
Yeah.
And then you see that next level of their technology where they can tap into your DMV records and they can pull up, like they can integrate all these systems that just give so much information so quickly. They known associates, who you usually drive with, like they're linking license plates together. The future is alarming. And so when we have only 10 in Charlottesville, that's when we really need to set up a structure that protects us.
Especially at this time when the pilot is coming to an end and we have time to rethink whether this technology is for us. In September, the pilot comes to an end. So in October, we can expect City Council to make the decision of whether ALPR stay in Charlottesville or if that, we tried the pilot, this technology isn't for us. There's too many questions in the air. So I think really now is the time to think about these questions.
Yeah. And we have two comments from Harold and Troy that I think would be good to kind of close out this conversation, because we still got to get to the jail expansion. I do got one point. And Max has a point too. But so Harold said that the city, meaning Charlottesville, is Harold Foley. Folks in our local listening area know who I mean by Harold, but he's also a member of Legal Aid Justice and activist in Charlottesville. But the city didn't do much to support the PCOB here, which is Oversight Board in Charlottesville, and that's why there's no real accountability. And then Razor said, where does police power stop and community privacy start? And to me, those kind of bundle together, you know, with what I want to make sure that you all say, you know, before we close the conversation after Max, is that, like, where do we go, right? Because, you know, there's going to be fears, some justified, some unjustified, but from the legal perspective, like where does that power stop? Like what is your ask as a legal professional to say, if you're going to use these cameras, this is what people's civil rights needed to look like?
Yeah, and I love that comment. I think that there are so few times where I'm like, well, the founding fathers, but America is built on the idea of private citizen protections in lots of ways. And it's crazy to hear people not have that same strong-throated protection in this instance, right? Where we've heard so many people talk about privacy before of communities in our neighborhoods. And I think that we always need to start with personal privacy in these situations, and then talk about public safety and how those things can react together. And for me, it's such a little fix of the warrant requirement that would make this feel, I think, a lot safer. Now, is that a legitimate protection, or is that just another Band-Aid? Like, we're giving it to the courts. Are they going to make the right call? I think we have to have hope so, but at least that puts a true check on this technology.
And just to, and we've had this, you know, point kind of throughout our conversation, this thread, that this technology is so new. What all it's capturing is new. The software is new. We need real time to look at the data before we just start putting up cameras everywhere, and it's too late to rein it back, right? So I think we really have to ask these questions now before we make this a staple in every community, on every streetlight.
Absolutely. And like I said, any police department that's against that must have something they're hiding, in my humble opinion. Right. But what you have, Max?
Two things that I want to mention. First being, and I want to say that I'm in no way saying through this interview that the questions that I'm asking, I am in support of or opposing FLoC. It's just me asking questions, my job as a host of the show. But the first thing is one of the conversations that I hear is that do we keep kind of going in circles, chasing our tails as far as what could be, what might happen in terms of FLoC if the use of this software locally isn't rendering these type of problematic behaviors, challenges that we're discussing here today, then is it good for us? Is there reason to, to keep talking about what to nix it because of what might happen? So that's one conversation that I've at least heard. And the other thing that I think is noteworthy to mention is it's been some months ago, but I know that our local police chief made an announcement at one of the city council meetings as far as cutting off our operations of FLoC to other localities. So they cannot access the information that we gather now. But if I remember correctly, we can no longer access theirs either, which, could pose a challenge if there's a crime that we're trying to solve and we could benefit from access to their FLoC information. So.
Good stuff. Thank you. Now, I think Razor has something before we go to break real quick. And do y'all mind hanging with us just a few minutes longer so we can get to the jail talk? Okay, appreciate y'all. Razor.
First thing I want to say, ladies and Max and Charles, great show. I mean, y'all had us on edge at the pools listening to it. But this is the thing I need people to understand. It was fine for us to have this information when we're looking for bin Laden. It was fine when we go to other parts of the world for us to access these types of things. Americans don't like when it's done to us. So it's pretty much, we've been watching this on movie screens since the beginning of time. But now that it's more locally, we want to have a problem with it. It's just one of those things as we let people come into the country, regardless of how you get here, legally, illegally, whatever, certain technologies that they realize work in other places, they're going to administer when they're trying to find the people, which leads us over to, I guarantee, more prisons and jails are starting to open up and get renovations because they plan on filling them.
That's a great segue. I see what you did right there. I see what he did. So family, is IMHO Talk Show. Tell a friend. Much more great conversation to go, and it looks like Ruby and Maisie will stay with us to so we can address fully the jail improvement / expansions that's going on as well regionally. So we are joined by the attorneys of Legal Aid Justice, Ruby Sherian and Maisie Osteen. And hey, we'll be right back right after this break. Stay tuned, and tell a friend.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
IMHO Talk Show. Sir Charles, Miss Max, Razor.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis, only on 101.3 Jams.
IMHO Talk Show. Sir Charles, Miss Max, Razor.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis, only on 101.3 Jams.
IMHO Talk Show. Sir Charles, Miss Max, Razor.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis, only on 101.3 Jams.
IMHO Talk Show, back like we never
That's
left.
right.
Charles.
It's Max.
My bad, Razor.
Man, be ye ready.
I'm out. I'm out of sync here.
But no, we are joined by and just delighted by all the intellect and the knowledge that we have right here, and the professional expertise from none other than attorneys Ruby Sherian and Maisie Osteen, representing Legal Aid Justice as well. Folks in Charlottesville know about the great work that organization does. And so we've talked about the flock or ALPR cameras, the license plate readers that's getting a lot of attention, and thank you all for that synopsis on that. I feel like you covered all the grounds, from the citizens that you work with to from your professional opinion, and then also the ask of our elected officials, right? And and others, hired officials that have access to this, right? So also another big thing that's in sort of the same realm when we talk about criminal justice, would have you, is the Charlottesville Albemarle Regional Jail. And this is in the expansion thereof. And my understanding is that this is something that a lot of prison systems and regional jails are experiencing, which is the space as well as the accommodations. You have folks who talk about that, okay, we like, this is America. So we treat people humane, even if they are inmates, right? So then that sort of justifies an argument about jail improvements. But on the other hand, when you talk about jail expansions, a lot of folks want to know, does that mean that is also still connected to the school to prison pipeline, right? Are we expanding based on quotas, right? And things of that sort. So where do we start there? In particular, the Charlottesville Albemarle Regional Jail. What can you tell us about that project? And I'd be curious to hear about what else you're seeing around the state in regards to these expansions that are being called improvements.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm happy to talk a little bit about some of the more recent developments that happened with that project, just so everyone is up to date. So starting in about 2019, the conversation started happening at ACRJ because there is a newer section built in 2000, but there's also the older section built in 1974 that has horrendous conditions that I'm sure everyone has heard about. But on June 16, 2025, Charlottesville City Council, in a close vote, 3-2, voted in favor of expanding the jail. And actually, the vote was supposed to be June 2nd, but this was pushed because all of the bids came back from the construction companies over budget. The original budget was $49 million, and the lowest bid that came in was $53 million from English Construction. So actually, at the time City Council voted, the reduced scope was not completed. It was still being ironed out. So City Council was really voting on a promise to bring it back under budget. And we now have the reduced scope that has been posted on the ACRJ website. And we unfortunately see that it's really prioritizing this expansion and new construction over the renovations. That was the original intent of this project, and what was really the hope of community members was to have the renovation part. But we see, for instance, that the building a second floor in the 1974 section has become a priority. We're not replacing the roof in the 2000 section that needs to be replaced. Again, it's really the new construction, the adding of the around 17,000 square feet that has been prioritized in this, and kind of future what the timeline looks like is that the construction is supposed to begin September 15th and take about 28 months to complete. But those are kind of some of the things that have happened in the interim, since I know y'all have talked about this topic before on the show as well.
No, but great to get your perspective, though. That's what we're about, getting all the perspective. But Macy, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and kind of outside of Charlottesville, this is at a time when we're seeing, and in Charlottesville, right, where this is a time when we're seeing numbers drop since post-COVID, when there was massive efforts to try and, maybe not as massive as necessarily we would want to see, but there were big efforts to reduce jail populations and prison populations, and those numbers did really drop, and that was being maintained in most places. So while we're seeing an investment, and Charles, I think your point is really well taken, that we need to be treating people well, and we need to be making sure that there's not bad conditions, people aren't eating moldy food, that there's not mold in their environment, that you
have AC,
they're not so hot. Yeah, exactly. But that's not really what we're addressing, right? We're addressing this expansion piece and not the conditions piece. That I am right there with you, that's really critical. Having loved ones and people that I know who've been incarcerated at Albemarle Charlottesville Regional Jail, I know that there are challenges and there's really bad parts of it that could be made better. But that doesn't mean that we need to also grow it at the same time. And sorry, Matt.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to ask if you could expound on what the currently proposed project will include. I think a gym is in there somewhere for the employees.
Yes, we raised that at City Council, and I believe that is no longer being prioritized. But yeah, like a staff rec room was one of the more top priorities. But earlier you said the school to prison pipeline. Well, we're really seeing a mental health crisis to prison pipeline with this project. So with the second floor in the expansion, what they want to do is add 7 mental health beds. I say mental health beds in quotes because we know people can't get well in the cell. It's essentially like a segregation cell. It's just closer to the medical office in ACRJ. So those are sort of the things that they are doing with this that we are concerned about. And again, if someone is undergoing a mental health crisis, we need to have services in the community that can help that person, not incarcerate them. Because also when they're released, what happens, right? They end up having to go back into the system that's not equipped to adequately handle this, and just causes more trauma.
And can you talk about the funding and the funding sources, right? Because another part of this argument is that if we have a budget that we can put towards incarcerating people, why can't some of this money go towards the preemptive measures, right? So what can you tell us about like how this budget, what this budget is founded upon, what contributes to it, so we can see how we can maybe, renegotiate that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So without getting too much in the weeds of funding, kind of general overview. So about a quarter of this, about $11 million, is coming from the state budget. And the rest of it is going to be split between Albemarle, Nelson, and Charlottesville based on their utilizations of the jail. So whichever jurisdiction has more of their folks there, they have to pay the higher portion. But it's a $49 million budget, but this is pre-interest, right? So for 27 years, they're going to have to pay interest on this. We're looking at over $70 million in total. And the money that Charlottesville will be spending each year for those 27 years is about $1 million just for Charlottesville portion, not talking about Nelson or Albemarle. So that $1 million we really could see invested in the community instead. Could go towards, like we said, the mental health resources in the community, re-entry services, programming for youth. I mean, there are just a myriad of other ways to which to spend this money rather than expanding the jail.
Very true. Got something, Reese?
No, well, I've always had the question of how much of that price tag, you said 49 million, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Will the developers themselves get? What percentage of that will be their payout for the renovations, the service provided?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because, this is done for profit. This is not something that, they're doing for free. I think that's a great question. I don't actually know the number off the top of my head, but, this is mostly architects. They do make money off of building carceral facilities.
True that.
Ladies, can I ask you a question, please? Yeah. I know that we're talking about some of the money going into the community to help people before they go to jail or when they get out of jail. But when we talk about building the jail and renovating it, it's almost like we're trying to work on the symptom and not the other part of the problem. Like, I never hear anybody talk about sentencing guidelines from the judges. Because if we want to work on the jails, then we work on some of the sentencing. Everybody knows that not everybody gets judged the same way. People get pulled over the same way, but they don't all get the same sentence. So as long as the judges can tell themselves that they are protecting the community by giving people boatloads of time or keeping bodies going in so that there's no empty beds, that's going to be part of the problem as well, in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
I think you said
it. Yeah, I think absolutely, and I think that goes beyond sentencing too, right? And I don't think that people are pulled over the same. Like, every point of intervention, there's work to be done, and that includes who's pulled over. That includes how people show up with their defense attorneys. That includes how prosecutors prosecute, how judges sentence, how judges grant or deny motions, right? How every single step we need to be looking at and investigating. And one of the things that I think Charlottesville is exploring, and it would be cool to see if there's community support for, or more diversion opportunities. And I think that there's been a lot of openness to that. And so seeing places where people don't even enter the court system for, there's a whole myriad of reasons people end up in jail. And we're looking at trying to get folks that don't need to be there, not there.
Yeah. I heard that there was some strategic processes, like some workshopping from different community groups and activists that was trying to address that point of figuring out like how do we not need more beds in prisons, right? Like to everybody's point that you've been making. But from your perspective, legally and whatnot, like what have you seen there as far as I guess more of a seriousness of that conversation, like when you have the warden there, like with a mayor, with an activist, and with an attorney, and people are talking about, okay, well, this budget is approved to expand jails, but how about we have, like more of an in-depth conversation, right, about like all of the needs, so we can try to avoid incarcerating more people, right?
Yeah.
How serious have you seen that conversation happen?
Unfortunately, we've been met. So one thing I'll say before talking on that directly is we don't actually have to guess that we know that Black residents in Charlottesville have disproportionate contact. We know that from the DMC study. That study gives us the data to say we know this is happening in Charlottesville. So this is not even like an assumption we have. This is rooted in data we know and have, that this is the reality of what's happening in the nation, but also specifically in Charlottesville. So that's on that. But also to talk about, so when we would bring this up, that, as was stated, this is not addressing the root of these problems. Particularly there's concerns about folks who are quote unquote high utilizers who return to the jail, right? Expansion does not solve any of those issues. Right. We were met with, we can do both, and we can expand the jail and do these other things. But as we know, money is budgets are limited, especially in a time when the federal government is cutting budgets to localities, that we have to be really judicious about how we spend our money. And so that was a really, it's not true that we can do both all and that there's an unlimited budget. And I think, unfortunately, with prioritizing this, we've showed with our budget what we are prioritizing in here. That's the Band-Aid solution and not the underlying problems.
Do we know how many additional beds the jail will be offering with this renovation?
So that is a great question. So the rated capacity, which is about over, I think it's 320-ish around there, is not changing. But the mental health beds that I was talking about, they go under what's called special purpose beds. So there's about 14 of those being added. They do not count as increased bed space because they're considered short-term beds, and that you're only there during a crisis. So that doesn't actually get counted as bed space, but there are going to be 14 special purpose utility cells added.
So 14 beds for $43 million. I tell you what, they can stay with me and Max for $39.50, and I promise I'll feed them 3 times a day.
That sounds like a much more elegant solution.
Has the jail committed to hiring, I don't know, therapist, psychologist, someone to serve these people who are experiencing the mental health crisis and need to occupy one of those beds?
I think they've stated at community forums that is their intention. Whether that's the reality that will be done, remains to be seen. But again, in a parking lot size cell is not where people get well, right? In a cell by themselves, essentially under segregation, it really only increases trauma. So I think even with the professionals, they're going to be limited to just the context of the jail and the reality of being in a jail.
Mm-hmm. So we're still stuck in my crawl though. And don't get me wrong, like I have friends and family who work corrections. So know that this is coming from a good place, but how dare we as a city even consider investing millions for staff recreation when our kids don't have anywhere to go in the evening times and they're out here shooting each other? How dare we?
Yeah.
But hey, Matt, you were about to say something.
The only thing that I can assume, I haven't seen the conditions of the jail firsthand, and admittedly don't know that I want to, but the only thing I can assume in a project like this is that conditions must be much, much worse than any of us have an idea that they are. And thus the need for such a major renovation. So, putting that into context of what our people the occupants are experiencing on a day-to-day, whether that's the mold or the, just the different apparatuses or whatnot in the jail, it must be a horrific situation.
And we share those concerns, and when it's a loved one there who's telling you about this horrific experience, it's hard not to be moved. And when we raise this concern, so 2 of the housing units in the newer 2000 section, which doesn't have, the same issues as the 1974 section, are empty. So we asked, why aren't folks going to be housed there if the conditions in 1974 are so bad? And we were given, like various answers, something like, well, the security there isn't as great, and you don't want people, in nearby cells who shouldn't be in nearby cells with each other. But however, that's exactly where all these folks are going to go during the construction in the 1974 portion. So if our priority is really making sure people are in safe, healthy conditions, we would have moved them to the 2000 section. And unfortunately, that's not what's happened here.
Ladies, can I ask y'all a question? I mean, y'all may want to answer, you may not want to. When are we going to just realize that people don't care about people? Like the amount of money that we're spending on, and I'm gonna say the wrong thing, Charles, but flock, right? The amount of money we're spending on cameras, and the amount of money that we're spending on, let's say the jail altogether is a city block, right? That amount of money could be invested into the community, but it's not wanted to because prison, drugs coming into the system, locking people up is big business. Like, I think before we grow at all, we have to be honest and say, look, all right, we don't care about people. You know what I'm saying? We want to figure out how to manage them. We know the homeless going to always be amongst us. The Bible tells us, yada, yada, yada. But I don't think, and it's not that people like yourself aren't doing great work, but until everybody's just honest, just say, look, once you get in trouble, we don't care nothing about you. Once you come from that side of the track, we really don't care nothing about you. If you make it over here, I'm going to look every 5 minutes to see if you do something wrong so I can send you back over there. If we're honest with each other, like we are with people from other nationalities that come here, then we can grow. I mean, we see it all the time with Hispanic people. People had prejudices, people had bigotry against them. So it made them group together and become a community of themselves, would help them grow. Black people did it themselves back in the 40s and 50s. We got away from it. We thought that other people's ice was colder. And then when we got diluted, then we had no power. But I think it all comes down to realizing that people don't care about people, whether it's economically, socially, or for whatever reason. And then from that point, we can go to the city council and the managers and everybody else and say, okay, we understand that don't nobody care about these people. What can we do now with the money that we have?
Razor, I think there is some truth there with there being an issue with people caring about people. But I think there are also individuals who would argue that the condition, the safety of the city as a whole is in the state that it's in because we don't want to arrest anybody. We don't want to charge anybody with anything. We don't want to send anybody to jail. We want to give everybody a break. We want to give everybody alternative sentences.
That's not it,
We
Max.
want to do, okay.
That's not it. They don't want to hear people complain about locking people up. If you go to, matter of fact, all right, dry snitching. If you go down across from Washington Park, you know what I'm saying? You'll see
that a
police,
legal term?
Yeah, it is. You'll see police officers sitting at the ends of street, like 12th Street, 11th Street, and open air market. People walking around like zombies. And you'll look at the other end and see the police officers sitting right there watching. You know what I'm saying? But as long as nobody is pulling a gun and shooting somebody, then they're not gonna do nothing because they don't want the so-called activists complaining about, oh, you locking up my cousin them on, you know what I'm saying? Because we got people that for real get on social media and complain about things happening, but won't so much as give $1 to somebody to help them outside of if the camera's not on. Yeah. And it ain't that whole thing of, oh, you don't know what I do behind scenes. And man, that's bull. Because the conditions that we in prove that ain't nobody doing nothing. For real.
So I feel what you're saying in both perspectives. Yeah, and I wanted y'all to chime in. And I feel like that's why you're always going to have people like us having these discussions. You're going to have lawyers like them. You're going to have activists for the fact of that we realize that the system is broken because the system was designed not to care about certain people. So, so I think you spot on from that perspective.
And also pointing out, this is a jail, right? Folks are charged, not convicted. So also just pointing out, how early in the system we seem to be throwing away lock and key and leaving people out is a real concern. And
prison,
instead expanding a lobby and adding a second floor,
Yeah. So again, as we kind of got to come to a close here soon. Same way that we ended the license plate reader camera conversation from the legal perspective, because you're going to have some who says we at least need the budget for the improvements. Others going to be saying put all that money, into community social services. But from the legal perspective, what is the ask right now, of the folks that you are working with, like with the activism that's happening, that's saying this is too much money for us to be expanding jails? Like, what is the median, for us to come to a resolution that's being asked?
I think to focus on the renovation part and not on new construction and addition would really be, at a baseline, the ask, and to instead invest in community services so that folks get the actual help they need and we're addressing the root causes of issues rather than the Band-Aid solution, as was said earlier. I also, if I could have a second, I have some upcoming events that I would love to invite folks to. So first is we're doing a Know Your Rights. So if you want to know about your rights, if you're being stopped by police or arrested, we're going to do a Know Your Rights session at One Stop. It's going to be Thursday, September 18th at the Carver Rec Center. And we'll also talk a little bit briefly about interrogations in that training as well. And we're also, People's Coalition is also doing some listening sessions for community input to help determine our next campaign, since we are officially closing our ACRJ campaign. So we'd love to hear from folks if they've been arrested or involved with the criminal legal system, to come share your lived experiences, concerns, and ideas you have around criminal legal issues in Charlottesville. We're gonna have an online listening session, which will be Thursday, September 18th, from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. on Zoom, or you can come in person on Saturday, October 18th, from 12 to 2. Lunch will be provided, and we'll also provide gift cards as compensation for your time. And I know that was a lot of info all at once, so I'll make sure to put that information in the comments on Facebook.
Please do.
Share some flyers as well, but we want to make sure folks know about those events that are coming up.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to do that. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, great conversation. I don't have anything left. We appreciate you. It's been a wealth of information that you've shared. I think all of us have a bit of a better understanding about the two topics that have been discussed here. So thank you. And the Legal Aid Justice Center is a resource to all of the city residents. I'm assuming Albemarle County residents can utilize your services as well.
Thank you so much, Jen, for sharing your platform to talk about a lot of these important issues. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
We live in a society in which structural racism is a very real thing. We are all dealing with that in every aspect of our lives, and the media is a reflection of our community.
Historically, black people have been portrayed a certain way in the media to justify normative assumptions around political and social issues.
More black people behind the cameras, in front of the cameras, more producers, more people of color producing, so they can go and get the content that's needed so they can highlight our attributes.
I've been in this industry for 15 years, and I've seen firsthand how our voices just aren't heard. Even if you're in the newsroom, sometimes you get completely ignored and stereotypes are allowed to perpetuate. And one thing we want to do is combat that, and also bring information to people so they can be as informed as possible when choices are made in this city, so they can do whatever they can to get their voices heard.
What I believe can be done about the situation is to have more people of color creating news stories, more people who have a interest in and a social consciousness that relates to the stories that they're telling.
Charlottesville Tomorrow looks at these issues. We can present them on IMHO. Vinegar Hill Magazine can take that a step further, and just together we can just make this thing that can be an example of how we can change the media landscape, how we can be more inclusive to get these voices in, to get these people heard. That's just one thing that doesn't happen in so many places, and it's a shame.
We think we live in a society that's very progressive, and we're talking about equity and diversity and inclusion and all these things. Still, the way that black people, and I would say, and I would argue, especially black men, are portrayed by the media is incredibly dangerous, and you've seen the sort of tangible violence that it's led to over the past year.
The community can support the SIM project by first and foremost giving us an opportunity. We understand that it can be difficult to give trust right now, especially considering the current social and political environment. But this project will only be as successful as the community allows it to be. And so we ask you to give us the opportunity to do the work, critique the work, and make sure that we stay aligned with the vision. Another way that the community can get behind the SIM project is through engagement. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you're talking about. We want to put your stories out there. And so whether it's reading the articles written by Charlottesville Tomorrow or Vinegar Hill Magazine, or tuning in to In My Humble Opinion on Sundays on 101.3 Jams from noon to 3 p.m., either way, we want you engaged. We want you to be part of this. The community can also support the SIM project through funding. To learn more about how to support SIM, you can visit our website. Thank you for your support.
We live in a society in which structural racism is a very real thing. We are all dealing with that in every aspect of our lives, and the media is a reflection of our community.
Historically, black people have been portrayed a certain way in the media to justify normative assumptions around political and social issues.
More black people behind the cameras, in front of the cameras, more producers, more people of color producing, so they can go and get the content that's needed so they can highlight our attributes.
I've been in this industry for 15 years, and I've seen firsthand how our voices just aren't heard. Even if you're in the newsroom, sometimes you get completely ignored and stereotypes are allowed to perpetuate. And one thing we want to do is combat that, and also bring information to people so they can be as informed as possible when choices are made in the city, so they can do whatever they can to get their voices heard.
What I believe can be done about the situation is to have more people of color creating news stories, more people who have a interest in and a social consciousness that relates to the stories that they're telling.
Charlottesville Tomorrow looks at these issues. We can present them on IMHO. Vinegar Hill Magazine can take that a step further, and just together we can just make this thing that can be an example of how we can change the media landscape, how we can be more inclusive to get these voices in, to get these people heard. That's just one thing that doesn't happen in so many places, and it's a shame.
We think we live in a society that's very progressive, and we're talking about equity and diversity and inclusion and all these things. Still, the way that black people, and I would say, and I would argue, especially black men, are portrayed by the media is incredibly dangerous, and you've seen the sort of tangible violence that it's led to over the past year.
The community can support the SIM project by first and foremost giving us an opportunity. We understand that it can be difficult to give trust right now, especially considering the current social and political environment. But this project will only be as successful as the community allows it to be. And so we ask you to give us the opportunity to do the work, critique the work, and make sure that we stay aligned with the vision. Another way that the community can get behind the SIM project is through engagement. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you're talking about. We want to put your stories out there. And so whether it's reading the articles written by Charlottesville Tomorrow or Vinegar Hill Magazine, or tuning in to In My Humble Opinion on Sundays on 101.3 Jams from noon to 3 p.m., either way, we want you engaged. We want you to be part of this. The community can also support the SIM project through funding. To learn more about how to support SIM, you can visit our website. Thank you for your support.
IMHO Talk Show. Sir Charles, Miss Max Razor.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis. Only on 101.3 Jams.
Back like we never left. It's Charles.
Max.
Yep, still here, still standing, Miss Max. IMHO Talk Show, y'all. I think that break was long enough for him, Max, right?
I think so.
Yeah, so so you should have the popcorn ready. And the family should be around the fireplace, so you should be riding in the car right now with the radio up.
That's right.
Windows up, AC on, because the hits keep coming, and we are joined right now with our friend Sally Hudson joining us once again. Sally, how are you this afternoon?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
Yeah, anytime. Always welcome. And so, when we talked to you last, I believe we were pre-primary, and we were talking about the city of Charlottesville's initiation into ranked choice voting. All right. That election surprised some people. I even heard some conversation around if ranked choice voting played an unfair advantage. And I think that was due to, based on some feedback that I've gotten, there was a everybody knows by Jen Fleischer getting the highest percentage of number one votes. That surprised some people. And so I think just because some folks were surprised, and again, like that could have been based on the voter turnout, and maybe you have some of that data. But I think just because of the surprise of it, being a newcomer, having some folks who seem to be pretty solid, pretty supported, it just makes folks question it. And I know when you explain it, it sounds foolproof, Sally, but how change is hard, right? Change is difficult. So of course it gets questioned. But I want to take it back to that, to sort of the primary phase, and I guess initially sort of like how it was accepted, like how it was rolled out for Charlottesville's first time to having a ranked choice a vote election.
Yeah. So big picture, this was our first time using ranked choice voting for a city council race. It was just in the June primary, just for the Democratic Party. There were 3 candidates running, Jen Fleischer, as you mentioned, and then also Mr. Juan Diego Wade and Mr. Brian Pinkston. And there are 3 folks running for 2 seats, and 2 people won. Jen Fleischer got about half the votes, and Juan Diego Wade got about a third of the votes, and then Mr. Pinkston got the rest. And I guess some people were surprised by that because there were 2 incumbents and 1 newcomer. From that, I would say let's look back at recent city council elections, and I would say that's the general trend among Charlottesville city voters. It is generally newcomers come out on top.
Yeah, one-term
mayors. If you look back at the election in 2021, that race elected Natalie Oshrin and Michael Payne and Lloyd Snook, but Natalie got the most votes. And she was the newcomer. She was the woman in the race. People were surprised when Sina McGill came in first in her race when she ran for city council in 2019. First timer, she was a woman. So I think we got to stop being surprised when women win races is how I actually feel about that.
What it is?
I mean, people were surprised when I ran for the first time and I won 2/3 of the vote in the city. And they were like, well, what happened there? I mean, in my last race in 2023, I was running against a very senior incumbent. I got 60% of the vote in the city. So I think we got to stop being surprised when Charlottesville voters choose new people. I think we got to stop being surprised when they choose women.
That's a great point. But that leads me to ask, though, what is it about Charlottesville, though, to where we're not seeing more longevity, from your opinion?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I do think there are plenty of folks in the city who wonder whether city council is being responsive to their needs. I don't think that's hard to understand. I mean, I also think if we think back to the last election cycle for council, when those candidates were on the ballot in 2021, that was a time when it was pretty hard to get anybody to run for city council. I mean, if you were out there trying to tell somebody you should run, they'd say, are you crazy? I want to run into that meat grinder.
Yeah.
And I think that has changed. I think that at that time, I mean, we were losing a city manager every 6 months, right? We had something like five city managers in 4 years. And I think to their great credit, Juan and Brian have helped stabilize the council, have helped hire a city manager who has stayed in the trenches and has started to get City Hall in a place where we've got more stable people in staff, and they're taking on projects and they're starting to knock them down. And so I think that what I heard from a lot of voters, which was a very different sentiment than in 2021, is they started to believe that City Hall could do things again. And so they wanted people in those seats who they thought might put their foot on the gas a little bit and say, now I want them to do more. I want them to do it better or faster.
So if we're seeing a trend in the most recent primaries compared to the past two, at least locally, what then are we saying is maybe the advantage of having ranked choice voting, if nothing, if it's the outcome is technically the same?
Though this is great. So we talked about this last time about how this June primary was a pilot, because a lot of people, when you talk about ranked choice voting, they think, man, that sounds complicated. Nobody will understand it. Do we even have the equipment that can do it? All of that. And so the first time you do it, you just have to get those concerns out of the way. Like, can the staff even do it? The real power of ranked choice voting will come if we can use it in a general election. Because I think right now, the range of people who we see run and who we see win is still very constrained by the fact that our local politics is dominated by a primary stage. And I know plenty of people of all political stripes who don't personally identify with the capital D Democratic Party. Both folks who are more conservative, more progressive, more anything, don't feel like that is a place for them. And so in order to really see the benefits, you have to take it into a general election. And I think where we see that is if we look a little further down the road at Arlington County, which has been using ranked choice for 3 years now. They have a ranked choice race for their county board seat up right now, and there are 5 candidates running. There's a Democrat, there's a Republican, and there are 3 independents. And those benefits really start to open up when you move it into a general election. So I should think
more
it is
consistency.
Say more?
Have they seen more consistency when it comes to folks who are reelected, right? Like, or have they seen that same turnover of someone new each term?
Great question. Yeah. This is the first time that they have had an incumbent run for reelection during ranked choice.
Okay.
So the first cycle that they did it, it was an open seat and 2 women won. The second cycle that they had seen it again, it was an open seat, again, a newcomer won. So this is the first time they had an incumbent run for reelection. The current board chair is running for reelection, and so we'll see whether he keeps his seat.
Got you. You know, I can't help but think too, though, because as you said, so it's even bigger than council. Like when it comes to the mindset of electing, new candidates instead of the incumbent, or at least the new candidate getting more votes. I guess is a better way of saying it, because as mentioned, seems like no one is really doing multiple terms over the past several years, right? It's like, so even beyond RCV. So like, but Charlottesville also being called the blue dot in the South, right? Like having a strong Democratic hold, in regards generally of who gets elected and who even runs for public office here in the city. So like, I can't help but think that it's more of a Democratic philosophy or like a Democratic mindset that maybe more of the issue. What I mean by that is that like what we're seeing on the conservative side, right, is that the loyalty is big. It's like, I don't even have to like you.
Yeah.
but we are loyal to this cause. And so I can't help but think that maybe that's what we're seeing in Charlottesville, is that we're fragmented when it comes to our political philosophies. And if somebody kind of is bringing something a little different, a little flavor new to the table, they're like, oh, let's give that a shot.
Yeah.
And instead of sticking in for the long haul.
I think that's right. I mean, I do think that in general, big picture, if what it means to be conservative is to want to stick to something, and what it means to be progressive is to want to move forward new ideas, new voices, then that general desire to have more perspectives in the mix probably is a more left-leaning thing.
Yeah. But would you say that is to our detriment? When I say our, right, like that's sort of the, like the general our of our detriment by then sometimes when there needs to be a plan maybe to overcome, like the competition or the opposition, so to speak, like within the political realm. If we're always looking for who's more progressive, Like, isn't that to our detriment, politically speaking?
Well, I would be careful often in drawing parallels between our national politics at the presidential level and what's going on in the city, because I think that, at this point, the city is a blue dot. And so even describing everybody as a Democrat, there's a whole lot of different stripes of people inside of that big blue tent. And so if we move up from there to the national level, I think sometimes those analogies fall apart a little. But I do think you're right that if we're looking at trying to field candidates at the national level that are going to win elections, they're going to have to build big tents across a wider people. And if you hold people to purity tests along any dimension, you might have a harder time engaging that coalition.
Good point. We are talking to Sally Hudson about ranked choice voting, amongst other things. And as we said, it was sort of a pilot for Charlottesville in the June primary this year, and we're not far from our general election. So one thing I know from business, like a pilot is just that, like, it's a trial, it's a test run. So what did we learn? Like, were there things that we should have done differently or that we will do differently in the general election, or it is what it is?
So ranked choice is over for the general election because there's nobody else on the ballot. And I think that speaks to our current politics. Nobody besides the Democrats filed to run. So the two candidates who won that Democratic primary, they're the only folks who are even in the mix for the general. We don't have any independents or Republicans on the ballot. So that means that there was no general election to build toward this year. The next steps for us as a community, as we weigh what to do with this ranked choice question, is to come back to, do we want to do it again? And if so, do we want to do it at the primary level or also at the general level? And so I think where we're at now, when we go into next year with these new counselors, we'll have Ms. Fleischer and Mr. Wade on the council, is to come to them and say, how can we make that decision in the most inclusive and robust way possible? Because the first decision to use it in the Democratic primary was largely a party process, right? Like, it's their party, it's their primary, they get to decide how they want to do it. But if we take it to a general election, that is all voters, it's all residents, and everybody's voice needs to have a role in that. And so from my perspective, I would really love to see our community go through a more formal charter review process like we have done in past eras in our city and also in cities across the country, where we take a look at the city's election laws from the top down and say, is there a role for this new tool in our elections? If so, how? And does it need to be combined with anything else? Like, do we need to, if ranked choice is only part of the puzzle, are there other things that we can do to make our elections more inclusive? I mean, I think there's a lot that we should be talking about on the money side of politics, if what we're really saying is we want to make it possible for people to serve on city council who come from a lot of perspectives, because it costs money to run and it doesn't pay much if you win. And that keeps a lot of people out.
And I think that brought clarity to me, because I wasn't aware of that. So I was thinking that ranked choice voting was something that was adopted like more so by the city registrar, because we do have multiple candidates running for a school board, for instance. But you're saying that it's not like a citywide, it wasn't adopted citywide, it was just a pilot for council.
It was just a pilot, just for council and just for the primary. So this really was like, can we get the voting machines right? Like, can we get everybody used to it, the election officers and all that? And then because nobody else filed to run, there's no way to use it in the general. So you're right. We got school board on the ballot this fall. We got statewide offices, but there's no council, which means there's no more ranked choice.
And so the power lies entirely with city council in terms of whether or not we utilize ranked choice voting for other elections.
That's right.
Okay. I think looking at the voter turnout as it pertains to the ranked choice voting system made me pay closer attention to the actual turnout. Potentially the results could have looked differently if we had more voters participate in our local primaries. How do we change that? I think it was approximately somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 people voted. And we are a locality of approximately 50. What are your recommendations there?
Absolutely. So we're a city of 50,000 people. We got about 30,000 registered voters. So if only 6,000 people vote in the primary, that's like the 20% of the voters. And that's good by Virginia standards. You look at a lot of other local governments and they have way fewer people show up. That is partly because our general elections are so uncompetitive by design. If we have policies like ranked choice in the general that encourage more elections to be competitive at the general stage, then that the decisive stage of the election, when more people are turning out to vote, the one that matters, will happen in front of more people. And so I think something that I have noticed a lot over the course of running for office is that whether people turn out or not depends a lot on whether the candidates are engaged with them, whether they feel like it's a stakes election that matters and that there's vigorous campaigns. And so if we have competitive elections in the general election, then more people will be voting in those. But as long as everything is in a tiny little primary, then we should consistently expect fewer voters. I should say there was nothing unusual about the turnout in this primary. This primary had higher turnout than the one 4 years ago. So it's, pretty much in line with what you can expect from a city primary in the city.
Thank you for that. I can't help but wonder too, because you've been on all sides of elections, right? Like literally, like you've probably won every hat, So like, I'm curious through this process, like through your experience as, as a politician, as well as advocate for ranked choice voting, like where is your faith, or how big is your faith right now in our, in our election system in general? Right. And I kind of asked that realizing that you are also a professor at the university, and I see how generationally, people have different fights and they have different causes, and the way that they view sort of our status quo system, right? Like it'll change generationally. So I'm just curious on your take right now, and seeing what we've seen, with all the talk about how maybe the last, federal election was rigged. And then you have some people say, well, I don't vote at all because it doesn't make a difference. Right. And then they'll use something like that as proof, like, see what I told you, if you got enough money, you're going to win, or, whatever the case, if you got enough friends in the right places.
Yeah.
So I'm curious of your perspective, maybe as Sally, I guess I can't even say Sally the citizen, because you got to use your experience to answer the question. But yeah, like, where does your faith lie right now? How strong is it in our, in our electoral system?
The reason that I am so passionate about election reform is because I've heard so many people tell me I don't bother to vote because my vote doesn't matter. The same people are going to win no matter what. And they're not wrong. What frustrates me, having been on the ballot as a candidate, is talking to those folks and knowing that their frustration came from a real place. I think we spend way too much money in politics trying to get out the vote, trying to nag people to vote, trying to nudge them to vote, and not enough time making their vote matter more. Because people make time for the things that actually matter to them. And I think it is right for a lot of folks to be frustrated and disengaged. And I think it is important we get down to the root causes of that problem, the policies that made people learn that their vote didn't matter. And so that's why I care about making more competitive elections.
I love it. Love that. I have a 15-year-old that has some insight if you care to heir about it.
Hear it from the mouths of babes.
I was actually surprised. I was like, that makes a lot of sense, son. So he said he thinks that candidates should be anonymous, meaning that people should only know where the candidate stands.
It's interesting.
Because he already sees, the bias based on the individual and not the issues.
I think I might have agreed with him 10 years ago. And I think public service changed my mind. And I'll tell you how. I used to be somebody who had a checklist for folks that I voted for. Like, they got to be good on this, they got to be good on that. I got the things that I believe in and I want to know where they stand. And then serving in office taught me that 95% of the decisions that I made were about things that I never talked to anybody about on the campaign trail, because all sorts of stuff crosses your desk. And it was a very rare slice of my time that I spent on the handful of things that you could fit on a mailer. Like if you had a voter guide that said, here's where the candidates stand on these top 5 issues. And there were all sorts of decisions you make in public service that never even see the light of day, because they don't come down to a vote where you push the red button or the green button. It's like, how do you deal with a sticky situation between people, right? The messy personalities of it all. And so I personally, as a voter, became somebody who now, as I'm looking at people, I look much more for their character, for their wisdom, for their curiosity about the world, because I think those are the skills that are going to serve them well, no matter what crosses their desk. Because I think we increasingly see that people are going to have to deal with some curveballs, whether it's federal budget cuts, whether it's pandemics, whether it's whatever. I want to know that that's somebody who I trust to think on their feet with values we share. And I care less about their ability to check off commitments on a to-do list.
And that's hard even still, because you get candidates who say they're going to do one thing and they don't. They get in office and they change. And the people that voted for them have certain expectations. And I'll tell you, locally, it's not rare when someone calls out even one of our city councilors. This is what you said you were going to do. This is what you support. Why aren't you speaking up? And so it's a bit of an anomaly to me still. Like, you can make as best decision, make your vote based on it as best of a decision as possible, and still end up with something very different in the end.
Absolutely. Yes, indeed. We are joined by none other than Sally Hudson. And so, Sally, like, what else are you up to nowadays? I'm sorry, Max, if I'm jumping, but as you stated, you're a professor at UVA. We are approaching another election and whatnot. So I got to imagine like that there's a lot going on right now, especially with the university going through sort of, the turnover, and then, the potential turnover after the election. Like, what are some of the top agenda items that maybe the community will hear you be vocal on, or some things that you think the community should be watchful of as we, kind of close out this 2025?
That's a great question. I get back in the classroom next week. Our students just moved in, so I'll be back at UVA teaching statistics in the School of Public Policy. I'm really interested to see how the students are feeling about this time, especially because we are in an era where we're looking at a government that seems to be pretty hostile to the practice of statistics entirely, right? I mean, we're watching public servants lose their jobs left and right because they didn't produce the right numbers that somebody wanted to see. And so I think I will be interested to see what it means to engage with students. I mean, in the same way that you asked me, what's your level of faith in the election system? I wonder how they are feeling about their level of faith in science as an enterprise, right?
Yeah.
So I think it'll be interesting to be back and talking with them about that. I am really invested, if you're talking about community priorities, in making sure that as we head into 2026, that we support our General Assembly delegation in taking some really strong proposals for Board of Visitors reform to the General Assembly, because the group that oversees our local university has consequences for everybody in this community. That school is not just about the students who are enrolled there or the teachers who are teaching them. It's the biggest employer in the community. It's the hospital that serves people all across the region. It's the engine of a lot of our local businesses for the innovations that they keep cranking out. And so I think that we have to be really mindful of what would it finally look like to get a real community voice on the Board of Visitors and not just have them be purely political appointees.
That is an awesome point. That's an awesome and great point. How big would you say that this election is, this gubernatorial election is coming up, as far as its impact on the university?
Huge. It's everything, because the governor of Virginia appoints the boards of visitors that oversee the universities. And so the next governor is going to get to decide who are the leaders of this university. And right now, as you mentioned, we have vacancies at the top of all of the major positions in the university, in the hospital system. And so if you care about the future of the University of Virginia or any of our public colleges in the Commonwealth, then you got to care about who we elect for governor, because that is their call.
Yeah. And on so many levels, right? Like, the health department, right? Oversight, the Department of Education and all that kind of thing, because being the state university, in so many ways, as UVA goes, so does the state, and so you see a lot of folks follow suit, whether it's our relationship, with folks like VCU and whatever the case is. So definitely something to be mindful of.
I just want you educators to be super responsible with educating and helping to formulate good human beings. These are our future leaders. These are our future politicians. These are, all those things. Make sure they care about people. Make sure that they are making decisions based on everyone's best interest. Make sure they're fair. Make sure the truth is still valuable to them. Like that. Those are the type of things that I think about each time school is in session, whether we're talking about our young children or college kids.
I think that's right. And I also think it is important for us as educators in UVA to help our students get connected to community,
Mhm.
because we get a lot of folks who come in from out of town or
Mhm.
from out of state. And I think, especially when the world seems crazy, helping them find their feet and their people in a place that they can care about keeps them grounded.
Yeah, that's spot on. Are you seeing any kind of like break or divide, like when it comes to, I guess, like maybe certain disciplines, majors and whatnot, like within the university settings now as well? Because one thing I think about is how we see how DEI came under attack, and I think we may have touched on this a little bit last time you were here, but I think what we've seen even more since we last spoke is that so now we're dealing with a generation of young people who has these good hearts that Max is talking about, and they want to go to a public university or what have you, or study liberal arts or whatever the case is, to be involved in communities, right? To sort of be, system changers, right? Game changers. But now they're looking at a world that's saying, no, we're going to keep everything status quo. You better fall in line, and that career that you wanted, may not even be here, when, like when you graduate. You know what I'm saying? It's like anything that's, like it's trying to help uplift people in what we thought was, to Max's point, being a good person. So I'm curious, you as a teacher, and maybe you've seen some things, as well as experience, like to where, like, how do we relay that sort of like insight to a young person that's determining their future?
Yeah.
Right?
It is challenging because a lot of students come into college, they understand that it costs a lot of money. They're very career focused, and they're trying to figure out how do they set themselves up for the job that's got to come after. It's something that I try to talk with them about, is that as I think about making sense of the world right now, some of the teachers who are still most impactful in my lives are the best English teachers I've ever had. I mean, high school English teachers who got you to read a book that taught you something about what it means to be human. And especially in times where it feels like there's really big battles between forces of something like good and something like evil. And so I think I would say, among my colleagues at the university, I have not felt disciplinary rifts. Some people saying, you got to go into STEM because you're never going to get anywhere with that English degree. That is not, I feel a great deal of solidarity among the faculty in understanding that we are educating whole humans. And in particular, if you're trying to make sense of this moment, this is when you need history. This is when you need literature, because a lot of what we're dealing with is different than the recent past, but has precedent elsewhere in history.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, I get a little bit frustrated, and I hope we can teach this here in Virginia, when people are talking about our current political moment and they want to go across an ocean and talk about what happened in Germany or in Poland. And we've got plenty of history right here in Virginia of what happened a century ago, when we completely restructured our political system in order to oppress some people and uplift others.
Yes.
And so we don't have to look to other countries to understand the chaos of this time. We've got plenty of local history right under our feet to talk about that. And so I think, if you're looking for something to hang on to in what feels like a chaotic time, go take a history class.
Spot on. Love it. Sally, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure talking to you. And definitely looking forward, to your future endeavors, next endeavors, and all that good stuff. Like maybe be a candidate sometime. You're not discounting it completely, are you?
I don't know about that. I mean, never say never on anything, but there's an awful lot of hats to wear in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Need good people at all phases, and it's definitely a pleasure knowing you. Keep up the great work, and you always have a platform here because you always have great information, for our listeners to hear about and learn about. So thank you.
And you probably mentioned this, but tell us again, when can the community expect you to kind of be going before City Council to discuss the future of ranked choice voting locally?
I appreciate you circling back to that. I think that we will start having some public programming after this fall's election, because we know that folks kind of have their political energy squarely focused on the governor. But after early November, keep an eye out for more news. And in particular, once we get those new counselors in the seats, that's when they will have a chance to start making that. And my hope is that what they will do is set up a public process that folks can plug into with plenty of time and notice.
Gotcha. All right, all right. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Stay with us, family. We will be right back.
IMHO Talk Show. Sir Charles, Miss Max Razor.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis. Only on 101.3 Jams.
We live in a society in which structural racism is a very real thing. We are all dealing with that in every aspect of our lives, and the media is a reflection of our community.
Historically, black people have been portrayed a certain way in the media to justify normative assumptions around political and social issues.
More black people behind the cameras, in front of the cameras, more producers, more people of color producing, so they can go and get the content that's needed so they can highlight our attributes.
I've been in this industry for 15 years, and I've seen firsthand how our voices just aren't heard. Even if you're in the newsroom, sometimes you get completely ignored and stereotypes are allowed to perpetuate. And one thing we want to do is combat that and also bring information to people so they can be as informed as possible when choices are made in this city, so they can do whatever they can to get their voices heard.
What I believe can be done about the situation is to have more people of color creating news stories, more people who have a interest in and a social consciousness that relates to the stories that they're telling.
Charlottesville Tomorrow looks at these issues. We can present them on IMHO. Vinegar Hill Magazine can take that a step further, and just together we can just make this thing that can be an example of how we can change the media landscape, how we can be more inclusive to get these voices in, to get these people heard. That's just one thing that doesn't happen in so many places, and it's a shame.
We think we live in a society that's very progressive, and we're talking about equity and diversity and inclusion and all these things. Still, the way that black people, and I would say, and I would argue especially black men, are portrayed by the media is incredibly dangerous, and you've seen the sort of tangible violence that it's led to over the past year.
The community can support the SIM project by first and foremost giving us an opportunity. We understand that it can be difficult to give trust right now, especially considering the current social and political environment. But this project will only be as successful as the community allows it to be. And so we ask you to give us the opportunity to do the work, critique the work, and make sure that we stay aligned with the vision. Another way that the community can get behind the SIM project is through engagement. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you're talking about. We want to put your stories out there. And so whether it's reading the articles written by Charlottesville Tomorrow or Vinegar Hill Magazine, or tuning in to In My Humble Opinion on Sundays on 101.3 Jams from noon to 3 p.m., either way, we want you engaged. We want you to be part of this. The community can also support the SIM project through funding. To learn more about how to support SIM, you can visit our website. Thank you for your support.
HO Talk Show. Sir Charles, Miss Max Razor.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis, only on 101.3 Jams.
HO Talk Show. Sir Charles, Miss Max Razor.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis, only on 101.3 Jams.
HO Talk Show. Sir Charles, Miss Max Razor.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis, only on 101.3 Jams.
HO Talk Show. Sir Charles, Miss Max Razor.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis, only on 101.3 Jams.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Charles.
Max.
Razor.
We are here once again, top of the bottom hour, bottom of the show.
Right.
That's a mouthful right there.
Mm-hmm.
But I know you've enjoyed the show so far, ladies and gentlemen, because I know I have. If I do say so myself, poor frog don't what, Razor?
It's a sad frog that don't praise his own pond.
That's right. That's right. And I know I can say stuff like that because I'm from Madison County. Max is from Green. You from Orange.
County.
We got Fluvanna on right
That's
now,
right.
by the way. So we know about country folk. All right. So we gonna say it like it is. we are joined by none other than Sharon and Sharon Harris and Josephus Allman. And let me get Josephus back on the stage. There we are. So Sharon and Josephus, can you hear us? How you doing?
Great.
Awesome.
Doing good.
I just got back from a couple-day trip in Memphis for work.
Okay. So you went deeper south. Okay.
Yeah.
Josephus, where you from?
I was a military kid, so I bounced around a little bit, but I call Northern California home, Chico.
Okay. I ain't never heard that name before.
Good stuff. And for those that don't know, so Josephus is an attorney who currently resides in this area. Sharon Harris is a journalist amongst a lot of things, community activists, but they are here on behalf of community voices. The motto is making a difference together. Their mission is they aim to provide news and information that encourages people to participate in local government and voice their opinions on the decisions that affect the shared community. And in particular, Sharon is a member of our Charlottesville and Media and Charlottesville Inclusive Media Project. She is a fellow amongst that, and her main work with that is focused on this rural media ecosystem and how we improve that. So once again, Josephus and Sharon, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes,
Sally did a great job of teeing us up too. She gave the mission really well.
Yeah. So there, the biggest news that we want to get to, and I know that Josephus has a lot of info he's raring to get to, is that there is a gas plant that is being planned in Fluvanna County that a lot of folks seem not to know about. Right. And so this feeds in to the conversation that we already wanted to have with Sharon anyway about rural communications, right? Rural media. How expansive can we make it to make sure that folks are in the know and what are the best means thereof to do so. But if you all wouldn't mind though, Sharon, let's start with sort of your goals and vision, as it pertains to not only the work that you and Josephus are doing together and make sure folks know about the ins and outs of this gas plant that's coming to Fluvanna, which by the way can happen in any community if we're not aware of development that's happening, right? But Sharon, kind of give us, more your perspective, your insight of what Community Voices is all about for our listeners.
Sure. And thank you guys so much for this opportunity. Charles, I can talk on this all day, so I'll try to keep it succinct. But yeah, we, just like Sally was talking about, when she talks to voters and they don't want to vote because they don't think the vote has any impact, right? The folks that started Community Voices with me were people that were trying to register voters and encourage people to become active in our local government. We heard that over and over again. And what we also know is a lot of it has to do with they don't really understand how they can make a difference, or they might not be as aware of what issues are out there being considered by our local government, because we do have a lack of news access. We have a weekly paper that just comes out on Thursday. It's a small, very, very small paper sort of centered on the stories around Lake Monticello area, and 6,300 papers are distributed, and 40, almost 5,000 of them don't go to the farther reaches of Fluvanna. They go to Charlottesville and Albemarle and Lake Monticello area. So the idea really behind what we're trying to do is get people information and help them figure out how they can raise their voice and make a difference in policy. Like Sally was talking about, I think if you can connect your votes to making a policy difference in your community, then you feel like it's worth your time much more. And you have to know what's happening. So we're really, really fortunate to have a good team of folks who are very much long, strong ties to Fluvanna. And then we'd like to bring in people, experts like Josephus, to help us understand what is going to happen with this power plant. What will it mean for our air and our waters? And I'm hearing from folks that are a little frustrated that there hasn't been any of that in our local news. It's sort of just this plan is happening, but what can it mean? People think of Tenaska as a great community partner because Tenaska tells us they are. They give away 4 scholarships at $2,500 a piece to 2 students in Fork Union, 2 students in Fluvanna and 2 students in Buckingham. But I think the corporation, you know this probably more than me, Josephus, I think they have $10,000 in profit. So $10,000, helping people understand what does it mean to be a community partner, get some of those facts out to people. But mostly Josephus can give us the expert information on impacts, right?
Yeah. And Josephus, before we jump to that though, Sharon, I do want you to elaborate on too some of the hurdles that you may be facing when it comes to communicating, like to the community, because Fluvanna in that area, Southern Albemarle, it may have more newspapers and things like that, more so than the other surrounding counties, right? And so like, and I could be wrong about that, but it appears that way. Like they're when you're talking about, like the rural Virginian, right? Lake Monticello, the Scottsville and all that stuff. And so I'm curious about if you could just elaborate a little bit on the hurdles that you're seeing, because I'm sure that's going to sound familiar to folks who live in even in other areas. And maybe like even like some of the plans and goals that you all have to counter the issues you're saying.
Absolutely. The Scottsville paper, I'm not as familiar with it because it really sort of is very much more Southern Albemarle, Scottsville area, and Fluvanna is pretty different from that. The rural Virginian in Buckingham, to my understanding, is now not housed in Buckingham, but I think it's under the Charlottesville Daily Progress. So the folks that do that are not local. So we do only have one paper that serves us, and wonderful people that work there. I'm friends with one of the writers. The editor and owner just doesn't live in Fluvanna and hasn't, so he's not as familiar with some of the communities and different areas of the community and local stories. And it's hard being in media today. You all know this. It's not easy, particularly print journalism, right? You've got to deal with ads. And the paper that we deal with, our Fluvanna Review, is the paper of record for our local government. So that's where the local government goes to put in notices about community meetings and hearings and legal notices. So there's not even a lot of space for news. So what we're doing is trying to figure out how can we, because what happens, I think, is, so we all know this too, that when there's a vacuum or a void, people are going to fill that with disinformation, with echo chambers, and divisions and misinformation become deeper and wider. So we're trying to just get people information. When is the Board of Supervisors meeting? How can you find the packet? When does the school board meet? How do you find their packet? How can you email leaders? People say, I don't want to go to public comment meetings because it's just a one-way conversation. We just say something, they're going to already make up their minds. How do we influence that? Well, here's the way that you can write letters. We're hoping to, as we expand, begin to have community conversations where we invite our elected officials to talk to us. Because when we're going to church groups and other groups and organizations, we hear people say, I didn't really know that was coming. We've heard people, oh my gosh, I didn't know that there was a power plant that's pulling water out of the James River and then putting water back into the James River. Like, I've lived here for so many years and I didn't realize that was actually happening. What does that mean for the air my kids are going to breathe? So we're trying to open up avenues of communication. We're starting really small, got a really small team trying to build. We're just so grateful when we can get people who actually have real good information like Josefa, so that we can try to get that to people in the community. So he gave us a whole lot of good information. We printed out some information, took it to the county fair, and some folks handed it out there. We're taking it to churches, just giving people information. We hear a lot of people just didn't know.
Yeah, and particularly in the rural areas, like churches used to be the end all be all, right? Like whether you're talking spiritual or you're talking politics or whatever, right? That's where you got the information. So the last question I have too before I want Josefa to chime in is, now that we're in this digital age, though, like what have you all found when it comes to people saying, like, what is their preferred methodology of receiving information? And are you seeing it like the older generation and the younger generation like have a divide, and is there a focus more so on one or the other, when it comes to how you want to distribute information?
You do know rural communities, Charles. You got it right. We're seeing a divide along age. We're seeing folks who are like, you got to give us something in print still. So one of our partners has took some things that a couple weeks ago, there were revivals in some of our churches. So one of our partners had one of our sheets and took it to the churches to hand out at revivals. We're really, I'm so grateful. The Charlottesville Community Area Foundation gave us some money, so we have a little bit of money to help with that, which is awesome. And we're trying to expand. We won't have the resources to do a whole print newspaper, but we can target it, right? We can get information when there are issues to people. We're hearing from sort of younger folks that they would prefer news, e-news and a newsletter. So we're putting that out there. But we're really just asking people how they want to get it and how we can get it. And we started this about a year ago, and issues have sort of come along that we've had to address because we want to have that voice. So we're going to take some time and figure out just how to get that. We looked at some maybe text messaging. Some folks were like, well, I don't know if I want to get text messages. So we got to figure out how to target that and how to do it. But what we try to be in the community at events and ask people those very questions. How can we get information to you? And it might not be a one size fits all kind of answer.
Yeah. One of the things that I think about when it comes, and I think this is a wonderful initiative that you are running here, but, when they decide to commit their time to something, first of all, trying to be more informed, and then, take it and then activating and actually trying to make sure that their voice is heard, and the local governing body is hearing their opinions. Their effort can wane, as you mentioned earlier, but it can wane when they're not affecting any type of change. And so, I always want people to be as prepared as possible to know that, yes, this is the work. This is what it looks like. Now, you may not get the results that you want. Like, how is that part of what you're doing, as well as trying to make sure that the people that you're interacting with are understanding the full circle of how this might work, and that sometimes any change takes time.
Yeah, those are great points. And absolutely, that's something we talk about, right? We want to make sure that we pace ourselves and we don't give people the idea that we're going to change the world in a day, because it's just not going to happen. But we are seeing, as you all know, in rural communities too, that it doesn't take a large number of voices to make a difference. So just recently, the Planning Commission held gave a survey to the community that, as part of their reviewing of the comprehensive plan process. And we've been hearing for so long that Fluvanna is rural. Everyone wants to keep it rural. We just want, and some of us have different ideas about what that means. Does that mean protecting the rural beauty, or does that mean keeping it back to the 1950s? So we have some ideas about that. But what we saw is that we did a newsletter. We got some information out. We told people, hey, the Planning Commission, the county government has to review the comprehensive plan every so many years. And part of that is to ask what the community thinks about it. So we said to newsletters to folks, they're going to have public meetings. They're going to have community meetings, and this is what they're going to go over, and these are the kinds of questions. And so I think we got a fair number of folks. We got a couple people at each of the 5 different voting districts where they have it to go and to take part and ask questions. We're building and going small, and we say, when you've got 20 people in a room or 15 people in a room, you can make change. You can actually have your voice be heard a little bit more when it's a smaller group. So, but yeah, we all know, all of us who've lived in Fluvanna for even a minute know that change doesn't happen quickly. So I think we're familiar with that, and we have to kind of keep reminding ourselves of that. But I will say that from hearing from our local government all the time that everyone wants to keep it rural and doesn't want development, we did get people to participate. We had sessions where we took the survey to people with computers and helped people fill it out. We took print versions to churches and got people to fill it out. And the comments came back a little bit different than the government says, that our local leaders say. Yes, people said, we like the rural part. We like knowing our neighbors. We like it's quiet. We like it's pretty. But hey, we want more grocery stores. And we want doctors. And we want more programs for kids. And the very interesting thing that I'm sure Josephus is going to be most interested in, if he's probably already seen this, our Board of Supervisors and Planning Commission kind of put some big obstacles up for solar development in our community. But the majority of respondents to this survey said they would like to see solar development in Fluvanna.
Yeah. Okay. I thought we were talking about one thing, and I'm lost. So I actually want to know, are we talking about the power plant that's going in, or are we talking about how we get information to people? So
both. That's why we have both of them on the call.
Okay.
Yeah. So Shan was just teeing it up for Josephus.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So Josephus, I'm gonna come in after you because I got some questions. But for the people that didn't understand, I felt I had to come out the back of the room.
Gotcha.
Okay.
But it's so connected, and I'm so glad that we get to connect them, because without voices, this could be a really done deal. Without people speaking up and understanding and really, really knowing what this could mean for the community, what it can mean for our health and safety and environment. Because otherwise, I don't know that there will be another opportunity. So I think there's a really strong connection. We've got to at least give people the information so that they can make a good decision. And if they don't think it's a good idea, like I personally don't, we'll have a forum to express that.
Yeah. Because as I said, this is, this issue, I think, is people find familiar. You don't have to live in Fluvanna to relate to a lot of this. And so the power plant, Josephus is just like a shining example, right? Of things that can come up in your community, if you're not tied in, to the communications, right? To be able to know, to be able to voice your concern. So Josephus, again, you're an attorney, and you're also a resident there. So kind of give us that background, right? Like give us the official introduction, as to what exactly Tenaska has proposed and where we are with it.
Yeah, thanks so much. And before I do that, I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier, that this is probably happening lots of other places. And it's happening in Chesterfield. So there's going to be a hearing for a similarly large gas plant there next week. And Tenaska also talks about in their materials how they were selected through sort of a fast track process through PJM, which is the regional grid that we're a part of. And so if you look at the projects that were selected in that, there's also one that was approved for Orange County by a company called Invenergy. Now, I haven't seen any sort of postings about that, but it was sort of given the green light from PJM. That doesn't mean it's guaranteed to get permits at the local level or from the state, but just sort of so people know what's coming down the pipeline. And I mentioned I was in Memphis this past weekend. That was for a convening that the NAACP put on about data centers and the impacts of the sort of power that's being used to fuel them. This is happening all over the South, especially in Memphis, where XAI put a bunch of gas plants unpermitted in South Memphis and ran them for almost a year before sort of any intervention by the county health department. So I talk about data centers because, Tenaska is proposing a 1.5 gigawatt gas plant. And so to put that in context, they have operated a 1 gigawatt gas plant there for the last 20 years. And that powers a lot of homes, several 100,000 homes. And so adding another, 1.5 of that would make this place in Scottsville the largest gas generation site in Virginia, if it were approved and started to operate. And so they talk about rising power demand as a reason to build this facility. It wouldn't be a utility-owned facility, so Dominion wouldn't own this gas plant unless there's some future plans to buy it from them. But the way that Tenaska operates is a merchant plant, and so they just sort of sell power into the PJM grid, taking advantage when prices are high. But for the most part, it's a combined cycle plant, which means that it's meant to run a lot of the time. And so this growing demand that they're talking about meeting, it's not, growing demand from residential folks like you and me. If you look at utility projections, there's small amounts of growth projected for like electric vehicles and, maybe increased manufacturing, but it's nothing compared to the growth that's coming from data centers. And so that's where this power is primarily going to go. And so
I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's important to sort of identify, who really is this plant designed to serve.
So if we need more housing, right? We need affordable housing. Sharon has found that people want more grocery stores, so on and so forth. People want high-speed internet, right? All that kind of stuff. Like, so why not? So why not a massive power plant, gas power plant?
Yeah, I think, they talk about the economic benefits to the county. What they don't talk about are the health harms that are inflicted on the surrounding communities.
Okay.
And so, something that I've heard a lot, even from folks in the clean energy space recently, is sort of like, oh, well, gas isn't as bad as coal. So maybe it's not the worst if we build some gas. But coal is the deadliest power generation source in our nation's history. Gas is sort of considered cleaner because it has less emissions of CO2 when it's burned at the point of combustion. But methane gas, when it's not combusted, is over 80 times more damaging from a climate perspective compared to CO2. And so that's another consideration, is the leakage in all of the infrastructure to get the gas to that point, not to mention the hazardous air pollutants that are burned at the stack. And so you have particulate matter, you have sulfur dioxide, you have nitrous oxide, ozone. And so those are particularly damaging to communities that have higher existing levels of respiratory illnesses. And so, you know, when they talk about the economic benefits, you've got to keep in mind that there are also significant health harms imposed on the communities around it. And if you look at the map where it's operating and where they propose the new one, which is just the parcel of land sort of catty corner, sort of every census block group that surrounds it to the west and south is considered an environmental justice community, what would be a fence line community to this power plant. And that's a trend. The Chesterfield plant is proposed in environmental justice communities. A lot of the plants that I heard about this weekend in Alabama and Louisiana and Tennessee proposed in Black communities. And it's sort of a continuation of what we know to be true, is that the most polluting facilities have historically been sited in Black and poor communities.
And so the second site is so detrimental to the surrounding community's health because, did I understand you to say that it won't actually be activated, so to speak, until there's an overage from the site that's currently there? That is what you said, right?
No, so it's just meant to be additive. And so that's the problem, is that it's sort of the existing power plant will continue to operate the same, and then you're just adding 1.5 times more pollution on top of that. And so the cumulative impacts of both of those plants then operating near full capacity in that area.
Okay.
What issues have you, I'm sorry, what issues have you seen already in those other locales that you mentioned as far as determinants on health outcomes, right? Like, you know, to be able to take, you know, for you all to take to the board of supervisors and be like, look, like, here's what's going to happen. Like, here's how people are at risk. 'Cause I know, you know, they're going to want that raw data. And then on the flip side, what is the power alternative that's being suggested?
Yeah, both really good questions. And so I can talk about some work that our organization recently did on a different proposal down in Pittsylvania County. It was a 3.5 gigawatt gas plant proposed with a bunch of data centers directly connected to it. And so that's significantly bigger than what we're talking about here. But we worked with a team of Harvard scientists in their public health department to sort of model and run the numbers on the actual health impacts, you know, trips to the hospital, healthcare costs, missed work days, missed school days. And in that case, the healthcare costs on that community down in Pennsylvania would have been $31 million on an annual basis. And so over 20 years, getting upwards of $600 million. Now, the Pennsylvania County Board of Supervisors denied that project on a 6-1 vote. So we were really happy to see that. And so, you know, you think about those similar numbers, you know, scaled down proportionally to the size of the plant we're talking about here. I think it's important to put those next to any economic benefits that are promised in the form of tax revenue to the county. I'll also point out the communities that have sort of the most cumulative impacts, the most power plants in their communities or refineries, have on average higher rates of different respiratory illnesses, higher rates of cancers, and significantly lower life expectancies.
Yeah, definitely see that in Southwest Virginia.
Nah. Question for you. Is this power plant connected to the James in any way?
Yeah, I think Sharon can talk to that a little bit. It's proposing to pull water from the James and discharge. I'm not sure if the discharge point is clear at this point, but maybe into the Rivanna or back into the streams.
My point being is that all of those are watersheds into the ocean, right?
Yeah.
The James
definitely.
and Rivanna go to the ocean, right? So essentially, we would be poisoning the world if we do this.
Yeah, that's the water pollution effects are also notable from methane plants, from any fossil plant that requires a lot of water for the cooling, and then the discharge and how that affects the ecosystem. To your point, how that later affects the Chesapeake Bay at the end of the line and the larger ocean in general.
Because I know at Lake Anna, where they have the nuclear plant, I've caught fish with eyes on both sides and two tails and things of that nature on the warm side. So I do understand, you know, the dangers of this. So I understand we're talking about the surface level of the people living around there. But for the people that don't think that it affects them, when you go to get your seafood or your fish or your, you know, the people who use fishing as a means of taking care of their family, when that goes into the grocery store, essentially you're going to be getting that because everybody likes to buy local, right? That's a selling point. So if I'm buying local, I'm essentially going to be buying poison.
And y'all probably saw the news about Walmart. Do we know if that was connected? They said they found levels of radiation in some of the like shrimp and food products.
Yeah, absolutely.
At Walmart's. Like, I don't know if y'all read about that or looked into that, but do you know if that was related to like, you know, polluted water from power plants? Or
I'm not sure. I saw the story, but I can't say the cause for sure. So yeah,
I don't know if you can go fast though. I'm sorry. Because I think everything you guys are saying are great, and I see to Josephus as the expert, but I just want to bring a little bit of Fluvanna history into it because, you know, we had Dominion had the power plant in Bremo for many years, and we're dumping coal ash into the James as a result of that, and so the community is now. Dominion is having to clean that out. And I think they have until 2030. You may know the exact date, Josephus, but it's still a process. Our environment has already been impacted by power issues by Dominion, who in the time that they were putting coal ash actually in the James River. They had approval to do it and it was great, but now they realize how bad it is and they're being forced to clean it up. And so I think we can't lose sight of that impact on our community and that history when we talk about future as well.
And I'm sorry, did you say the Fluvanna Board of Supervisors has already approved this project or they're considering it at this time?
Considering it. I believe it, you may know what I'm hearing, I'm not sure, is it's going to go before the Planning Commission perhaps in October and then maybe the board in November.
Yeah, I went to the, Sharon and I were both at Tenaska. They held a community meeting for the power plant to share some information about it. But Charles, I want to answer your other question you asked about alternatives to this power plant. And that's a really important question because, you know, sort of in the same way that a lot of people are talking about gas as being maybe an okay alternative, is this belief that clean energy can't get the job done. But solar panels have been getting more efficient. And so, you know, we all know that the sun only shines when it shines. But another important technology that's coming along and really growing is battery storage. And so that allows us to sort of make the most out of the grid we have. And just to sort of say a little bit about how the electrical system is built out, it's built out sort of to serve the peak needs. But the peak needs is nowhere near sort of the power that we're using the rest of the day. And so if you look at PJM, that regional system I was talking about, 80% of the time, we're only using 50% of the existing capacity on the grid. And so how can we put in storage to store the energy when we don't really need it and discharge it at peak times, and do so in a way that doesn't pollute the surrounding community? Same with solar, especially paired with storage. You know, you can also make more out of the existing transmission lines that we have and distribution lines by making upgrades that sort of allow them to carry more electricity through them. And you can also ask these large power users to be flexible and shift the way that they're operating. You know, there's sort of this assumption that we've got to meet these data centers 24/7. But there are, certain players like Google that are showing it's possible to be flexible with the way that their sort of computing works. And so they can power down or shift to different locations when grid strain is high. And so, before we talk about unleashing another wave of poisonous gas plants on our most vulnerable communities, let's see what we can do out of the existing grid and adding storage, making it more flexible, and doing it in a way that isn't adding more harm to the communities that have, to Sharon's point, been bearing the brunt of industrial pollution since our country's history and inception. So,
Josephus, can I push back a little bit? Just a little bit. All right. I was fortunate enough to be a union electrician for many, many years, and what you're talking about is the battery backup system, which is called a UPS that goes to it. Those are deep cycle batteries. That is very, very detrimental to a system because companies like AT&T, when they were called Bell Atlantic, their backup systems were full of batteries. Now, when there's a problem, you cannot shut that off. It just burns because it's not like a switch that you can turn off. So the lithium batteries that you're talking about are very, very dangerous. And the reason we know this is because when you go to get rid of them, an old car, they make you take the battery out so they can separate it because it has a different way of being discharged because of the chemicals inside of it. So I'm not so sure. I understand what you're saying, but coming from the field, I don't think that is an accurate play with the solar because we're using UPSs and because of the stuff that it takes to make a battery hold the charge. So I don't know if that's a good thing as well. Just a little.
Well, that's fine. And we'll be curious to know sort of the year when that sort of stuff was happening because batteries have gone a long way. But a lot of people don't know about what's happening in Texas and in California. And so I think a lot of people know about that really bad winter storm that happened in Texas in 2021, Winter Storm Uri, where hundreds of people died because power plants shut off and the system, just broke for days. Since that time, Texas has added 10 gigawatts worth of batteries, and its blackout risk went from 16% in 2021 to less than 1% this year. So this is a proven sort of solution to grid reliability concerns and making the most out of what's out there. I think the technology has really come a long way. You can see the same thing in California, who has also built out several gigawatts worth of batteries in the last several years. And so the system controls have really improved and allow grid operators to have better control over the batteries and to have sort of better balance throughout the system. So I would push back against that and just point to, the very visible examples in Texas and California about how batteries have increased reliability and really displaced the need for gas generation. People talk about how gas is cheap, but Texas is the only fully deregulated energy market in the country. Last year in 2024, they built 14 gigawatts of total energy capacity. Less than 5% of that was gas. The majority was solar and storage and wind. And so when you're talking about what's the cheapest thing for consumers, what's the fastest thing to get online, and what's been shown to create a really reliable grid in Texas over the last few years, I think, batteries have proven themselves to be a viable solution.
That being said, are there multiple players at play that is really moving this ball? Meaning that when you talk about things like gas, right, then that's a whole industry to itself. So I'm curious if you've seen, from the political / legal standpoint, are there corporations out here, right, that's not doing the solar option or even the battery option for that matter, because there's money to be made on another side? So are we putting the people's health versus the revenue share?
Yeah, I think you haven't seen, at least in Virginia, right, in the last few years, you have, the Greensville plant and another Bear Garden, Brunswick, that were built in the 2010s, but not really so much lately. What's more been slowing the adoption of solar and storage storage to a lesser extent, but really solar throughout Virginia, is, to Sharon's earlier point, the fact that a lot of counties like Fluvanna have made it really hard to permit solar in their counties. And so, out of Virginia's 96 counties, about a third of them either ban solar or, have really serious restrictions on how you can develop it. And unfortunately, a lot of those counties that have restrictions or bans are some of the counties where solar is sort of the best place to put it in terms of, large available plots of flat land. And so I think that's been a problem. And so, you're having a hard time getting solar on the grid here. And it's not just a problem in Virginia. States throughout PJM, have been having varying levels of difficulty with local permitting.
So Charles, they won't put it where there's open land that's probably owned by somebody that don't look like us, but they'll put it in the backyard of people that do look like us.
Yeah, and that's the part. Yeah,
that's what it sounded like you said.
Yeah,
but I'm curious about what's the radius of, I guess, the health, the effect on an individual's health as far as what the toxins that plant puts out. Do you have any sense of that?
Are you talking about solar facilities?
No, I'm talking about the gas facility.
Oh, sort of the
footprint.
How many counties over? What the footprint?
Yeah, and so I can't speak specifically to this plant because we haven't done any modeling, and so I can't speak about the modeling that we did in Pennsylvania, and sort of scale that down a little bit because it was a bigger power plant. But in that instance, 17,500 people in Pennsylvania County would have been exposed to a PM 2.5 concentration greater than 0.1 micrograms per cubic meter. And
you can put that in layman's terms.
Pushing right up onto the limit that is safe for human health, especially considering the PM 2.5 emissions from that existing facility. And PM 2.5 is what scientists consider a non-threshold pollutant. There's no level at which exposing a community to PM 2.5 is safe for them. And so, that's troubling. And that's just the PM 2.5. That's not the other volatile organic chemicals or hazardous air pollutants that are, coming out of the gas plants.
I mean, agreeing to this type of project is like a death sentence. Yeah. I mean, I don't even know what your government
follow the money
is really
trail.
Talking about here. I mean, I suppose that your planning commission has to do its due diligence if they're presented with a project of evaluating it, and then I believe I'm correct in saying that they either make a recommendation to your board of supervisors to approve or not approve the project. But what are we really arguing about? It's a death sentence.
And then Max, the crazy thing about it is that because it's a gas, anytime that we have overcast or rain, it takes, like he said, and it increases that methane gas lower to the ground to the people where they are. Paint booths do it all the time. In order to keep the overspray off, they circulate water. So anytime your humidity is up, it's going to keep the gas down close to the ground where the people are, which where your plants are, which where your water supply is. So when you say the footprint is as far as water goes. That's how big the footprint is.
Yeah. It's deep.
Go ahead. Just Max, that point about it being a death sentence. When I was in Memphis, hearing from Keyshawn Patterson, he runs Memphis Community Against Pollution. The community that he lives in South Memphis that now has this XAI plant, that has an oil refinery, that has a steel manufacturing plant, the life expectancy is 63 years old. If you go to North Memphis, less than 5 miles away, the life expectancy is 81 years old. That's a over 20-year gap. And so we've really got to ask ourselves, are we going to continue to create sacrifice zones throughout our country? Or are we going to do this in a responsible way without poisoning communities?
Well, y'all all said it in the beginning, because the first thing, even on their website that I was looking at when we started talking, they start talking about how many scholarships they give away, how many scholarships they got. That's the pimp game.
If you live.
Yeah, that's the pimp game. It always has been.
they have a great messaging campaign. You know, the fossil fuel industry in Tonasca has a really good job of getting information out, and I think that unfortunately our local leaders have heard more from them. And so when we're talking to some of the folks, they're telling us the same thing that's Tonasca saying. So that's why getting information to the community, why this is such a thank you for today and for Josephus, because getting this information to people so that they can understand that, yes, we need money in our county coffers, but at what cost does that money come to us, right? What health costs are we having to spend as well? And I just don't think that they have a good understanding of those risks. So we've got our work ahead of us, Josephus in particular, to help get this information to people, because I think that we saw that with solar. There was just a real lack of understanding. We had family farmers who were saying, hey, I can save my family farm and get a contract with a community solar company. Like people didn't fall along political lines like you might think, right? People were saying, wait, I want to learn more about this. There might be a way to bring solar in that's going to help our community and not just harm it. But there's just so much disinformation and misinformation.
Yeah, and to Razor's point too, I don't know if you all have yet, but you probably want to reach out to environmentalists and, you know, like the water conservation folks, like even in Albemarle and Charlottesville, right? Because you're talking about the potential of polluting your surrounding area, not just Fluvanna, you know. So yeah,
we're lucky to see a good turnout already to sort of that first community meeting that Tonasca had. So, you know, I was there, Sharon was there. There were folks from Appalachian Voices, which does a lot of great work here and, you know, in other states in the Appalachian region. Sierra Club folks were there, folks from the Fluvanna NAACP branch. And so a lot of folks that are concerned that are already engaged early in the process. But yeah, Charles, thank you. We'll definitely reach out. You know, there's a large coalition of individuals and organizations who should naturally oppose something like this in their community.
Wait a minute. Isn't there a bottling company in Fluvanna, like Pepsi or water or something like that? Here. Like, because if there's a bottling company, Max, this will help you right here. If there is a bottling company, which I think there is within that watershed, then the footprint is as far as those trucks go to drop off drinks in those coolers. Because if it's bringing in the water to cool it and then putting it back out somewhere else, and then that same water is being used to bottle, that's how large your footprint. However long that those trucks travel out to drop off stuff, that means everybody's getting some of that poison.
That makes sense.
So not only are you breathing it, but you're ingesting it, which is easier for it to get to your organs and whatnot. So this is a hard no for me.
And are y'all seeing these proposals in other areas? Because, you know, like look at Louisa, which is right next door, right? Like they're undergoing massive growth. So have you heard of similar proposals in other nearby? I heard you mention Chesterfield, but I was thinking maybe a little closer.
Yeah, one in Orange. So I don't know
you said
much farther than that.
Do you know where in Orange?
No, you know, the only details in that sort of approval of projects from PJM, that regional entity, was just sort of really high level. So the name of the company, the name of the proposed county, but, you know, you saw Tonasca on there, Fluvanna County, the exact size of the project that they're proposing now. And so I just think, you know, it's, you know, folks should be ready for something like that to come to Orange. And yeah, I think these things are going to keep popping up as a, you know, justification to serve the high power demands for these data centers that are popping up everywhere.
One of the things I wanted you to elaborate on. I'm sorry, Sharon. Could I ask you?
Yeah. I was going to say, Louisa's a great example, not necessarily about the power plant, but they pushed back on a third data center. They community organized and were very vocal about saying, we don't want this third data center coming here. So I believe Amazon withdrew their petition. I'm not sure that it's going to come back again, but that was a really good example of the community coming together and asking questions and demanding information and making their voices heard, such that they made a difference on whether a third data center would come.
Yeah. And I wanted you to elaborate as well on when you were talking about like the potential healthcare costs, and, you know, in cohesion with the area that is going in. I'm curious that the area that they're proposing to put it in, is that like more so elderly and Black, or was it a different demographic? And then when you were talking about, like the impact on potential healthcare costs, like that would play a role into decision makers as well, right? Because if you're talking about people that are on Medicare, Medicaid, then they may listen a little more, right? versus if it's somebody who's being covered by insurance. So I was curious.
Yeah. So I'm just pulling up the map that I was talking about earlier. Virginia's DEQ has a state version of EJ Screen. They call it EJ Screen Plus. But you can look at the census block groups, and I was talking about earlier how all the census block groups sort of surrounding to the west and south qualify as EJ communities. And so the one directly to the west of it is a low-income community. 57% of the residents in that census block group are below 80% of the area median income. 35% are below 2 times the federal poverty level. If you look at the census block directly below that, it's a community of color under Virginia state law. So 41% of that census block group is Black or persons of color, as the law defines it. You go one further to the south, it's another community of color, over 52% Black or other communities of color. And sort of you look all the way down and around, those are all fence line communities. And they're also, the two that I just mentioned are also, qualify as low income communities under the law. The one that sort of has the highest rate, 77% are below 80% of the area median income. And so exactly to your point, Charles, this isn't being proposed in affluent communities. It's being proposed on the most vulnerable communities.
Yeah. Maybe show the state those numbers if we're talking about people that they're going to be paying for these hospital visits. Like that's just another avenue to propose it. But yeah, Matt.
I mean, I don't know how your board of supervisors can have this conversation without talking about the ramifications of a project like this and its impact on its residents. I mean, to me, it's simple. Look, I've made a decision for them. Like, it's a common sense thing, and it would be shameful. It would be shameful for any one of them to vote in favor of something like this.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely
regardless of the turnout, right? Regardless of whether or not people are coming to your board of supervisor meetings or showing up at your planning commission meetings and different things like that. It's a common sense thing.
If they do vote for it, make sure you give them free housing right around the data center.
Yeah, free housing.
Yep.
Yeah. And to that point, like, thank you so much for having us on today and letting us share about it, because if it weren't for folks like us in the community, you're not going to hear about these negative impacts. At the community meeting that the gas company put on, they had a 30-minute presentation about the noise impacts and talked about the tax revenue. But when asked questions about the emissions and hazardous air pollutants that they would be putting by more than doubling their existing plant, oh, sorry, we haven't looked into the emissions or how this would impact the local community. And so they're not going to do it. It's up to folks like us. And so thank you so much for having us on today.
Yeah, thank you all. And Sharon, last words as far as how the folks can stay in contact with you all and be supportive.
Yeah, so I think, did you share in your social media? I believe you shared our website and how you can email us or subscribe to our newsletter. But we have a Facebook page and we have a website. We're trying really hard to organize. We're going to be meeting with some folks. We've got a lot of community members who are frustrated and anxious. We got a lot of people to come out to the meeting and ask questions. And then Josephus will tell you the folks from Tenaska just kind of we had to write our questions on a card. We couldn't stand up and ask them, so we couldn't see what our neighbors thought, and they just cherry pick the kinds of questions they want. So to your question, if people have questions, we need to come together and get our board and planning commission to answer them, since the Tenaska folks did it, and have them ask them. We need to really get our word out. So however you can let people know to connect with us. And if they have concerns, join with us, come with us. We're going to try to schedule a couple community meetings before the Planning Commission meets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a big issue. I agree, Max. I don't understand how they could vote for it, but I have a concern that they might. So we got to do something to help them understand what we feel as a community, and inform them that I'm not sure they're aware of some of these impacts, or they don't see them quite as we do.
Right.
Yeah, and Sharon, and just to make sure I have it right, because I don't think I have the actual website. If you wouldn't mind putting it in the comments, and we can then
Sure.
everyone will see it. That would be great. Yeah, so thank you all. Josephus, Sharon, keep up the great work. It's well to do. Like I said, I think a lot of people can relate. So hopefully, that'll make folks pay even more attention when they think about the impacts and how it potentially could be their own neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Max,
thank you for everything.
Razor,
Yeah, thank y'all. I mean, I have selfish reasons why I like to fish, so I don't want anything polluting my water. So I mean, that's where I'm coming from and for. So while y'all are telling people what they need to look out for, try to tap into what means something to them. For some people, it's their children. For some people, it's their land, the legacy that they're losing, the noise pollution, whatever. But, I think that's the easiest way to get people's attention is to cater to their selfish needs and then go from there to educate them.
Thank you.
Thank
y'all.
so much.
Take us home, Max.
Yeah.
All right. It's been fun. It's been real. Great show. In my humble opinion, we'll be back live again soon. So stay with us. Tell a friend, as Charles says, that In My Humble Opinion is on.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
IMHO Talk Show. Sir Charles, Miss Max, Razor.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis, only on 101.3 Jams.